On the morning of July 4th, 1930, a passenger ship left the port of Villefranche-sur-Mer on the French Riviera. The ship was called the Conte Verde. It was not carrying royalty. It was not carrying diplomats. It was not carrying soldiers. It was carrying football players, French football players, Belgian football players, Romanian football players, referees, officials, and one man carrying a small gold trophy that nobody outside the football world cared very much about. At least not yet. The voyage would take more than 2 weeks. The destination was Uruguay. For many of the passengers, it was the longest journey they had ever taken. Some stood on deck watching Europe disappear beyond the horizon. Some played cards. Some trained when the weather allowed. Some wondered whether the entire trip was a waste of time. Because in 1930, nobody knew whether the World Cup would survive. The name itself meant almost nothing. There had never been one before. Most European countries had declined the invitation. England stayed home, Germany stayed home, Italy stayed home, Spain stayed home. Many football officials considered the tournament too far away, too expensive, or simply unnecessary. To them, it was a strange experiment on the other side of the Atlantic. Not the future of football, certainly not the future of global sport. Yet somewhere between Europe and South America, while the Conte Verde crossed the ocean, history was quietly changing direction. 96 years later, billions of people would watch the same tournament. Cities would spend years preparing for it. Governments would compete to host it. Players would dedicate entire careers to winning it. The World Cup would become one of the largest recurring events in human history. But none of that existed yet. Only a ship, an ocean, a handful of football players, and a trophy small enough to fit beneath one man's arm. Tonight, we are going to follow that trophy across nearly a century, across wars, across dictatorships, across television, across globalization, across 23 tournaments. We are going to watch football grow from a regional pastime into a shared ritual experienced by billions of people. Because this is not only the history of the World Cup, it is the history of the modern world, told every 4 years, one tournament at a time. Welcome to Quiet History. Before we begin, a quick word about what we are doing here. Sleep is not empty time. As the evening settles in, your breathing slows, your thoughts become less urgent, and the world gradually feels a little quieter. History can be good company for moments like that, especially history whose outcomes have already been decided. The matches in tonight's story have already been played, the goals have already been scored, the trophies have already been lifted. There is nothing to worry about, only a story to follow. If this helps you relax, a like and a subscribe help more than you might expect. New episode every week, same time, same format. Get comfortable. Tonight we are traveling to Montevideo. Chapter 1. 1930, Uruguay, the first tournament, and why that country. If you had arrived in Montevideo in the summer of 1930, the first thing you would probably have noticed was the construction. It was everywhere. Workers carrying timber, workers carrying cement, engineers arguing over schedules, politicians making promises, journalists asking whether everything would be finished on time. Because in just a few weeks, the city was supposed to host something entirely new, not a national championship, not an Olympic tournament, a world championship, the first FIFA World Cup. The problem was that nobody had ever organized one before. To understand why the first World Cup happened in Uruguay, you need to understand what Uruguay looked like in 1930, because it was not the country most people imagine. Today, Uruguay is often viewed as small and relatively quiet. In the early 20th century, it was one of the success stories of the world. European visitors frequently described Montevideo as one of the most modern cities in South America. Its port was busy, its economy was growing, its middle class was expanding. For a country of roughly 2 million people, Uruguay possessed an outsized sense of self-confidence. Some historians describe the period between 1900 and 1930 as Uruguay's golden age. Universal education had expanded. Workers had gained protections uncommon in many countries at the time. Democratic institutions had grown stronger. Life expectancy had improved. For a brief period, Uruguay looked like a country whose future would be even brighter than its present. Then there was football. Football had arrived from Britain decades earlier. At first, it was mostly played by expatriates. Then local communities adopted it, then embraced it, then transformed it. By the 1920s, football had become something more than a sport in Uruguay. It had become a source of national pride, and national pride mattered because Uruguay lived beside giants, Brazil to the north, Argentina to the west. Both larger, both more populous, both impossible to ignore. Football offered something unusual, a way for a small country to compete with larger neighbors on equal terms. In 1924, Uruguay traveled to Paris for the Olympic Games. Many Europeans expected the tournament to be won by a European nation. Instead, Uruguay astonished everyone. Their passing was quicker, their movement was freer. Crowds fell in love with them almost immediately. They won gold. 4 years later in Amsterdam, they did it again. Another gold medal, another demonstration that football's center of gravity might be shifting. And so, when FIFA began discussing a global tournament, Uruguay looked like a logical host. The country had football credibility, political stability, financial resources, and enormous enthusiasm. The government wanted the tournament. The public wanted the tournament. Everyone seemed eager. Not everyone shared that enthusiasm, particularly in Europe. In October 1929, the New York Stock Exchange crashed. The effects spread rapidly. Banks failed. Businesses closed. Unemployment rose. The Great Depression had begun. Few countries escaped untouched. By the time invitations for the World Cup arrived, many football associations faced a difficult question. Should they spend money sending players across the Atlantic during an economic crisis? Most answered no. England declined, Italy declined, Germany declined, Spain declined. Several others followed. Eventually, only 4 European teams agreed to come: France, Belgium, Romania, Yugoslavia, and even they faced an extraordinary journey. On July 4, 1930, they boarded the Conte Verde. On board were players, coaches, referees, officials, and FIFA President Jules Rimet himself. Rimet carried the World Cup trophy. Imagine that image, the president of FIFA standing aboard a passenger ship carrying the trophy beneath his arm. No private security, no armored transport, no television cameras, just a man crossing an ocean with a trophy that might or might not matter in the future. History often looks surprisingly ordinary while it is happening. The voyage lasted more than 2 weeks. When the passengers finally arrived, they discovered something that should have worried them. The main stadium was not finished. The Estadio Centenario had been designed to hold nearly 90,000 spectators. Unfortunately, construction had encountered reality. Heavy rain delayed work. Materials arrived late. Workers were still building the upper tiers when teams arrived in Montevideo. Nobody considered postponing the tournament. If something was not finished, people worked harder. The first World Cup was about to begin. On July 13th, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, France faced Mexico. Only a few thousand spectators watched. Many people living in Montevideo were not entirely certain what this new tournament actually was. Some attended out of curiosity. Few believed they were witnessing the beginning of the world's greatest sporting tradition. Among the French players was a factory worker named Lucien Laurent. Football was not yet a full-time profession for most players. Many held ordinary jobs: mechanics, office clerks, factory workers. Laurent worked in an automobile factory. 19 minutes into the match, a cross arrived from the right. Laurent met it on the volley. The ball flew into the Mexican goal. His teammates congratulated him. The match continued. No fireworks, no commemorative ceremony, no special announcement. Nobody yet understood what had happened. Lucien Laurent had scored the first goal in World Cup history. Years later, journalists repeatedly asked whether he realized its importance at the time. His answer never changed. No, to him, it was simply another goal. History has a habit of assigning importance long after ordinary people have returned home. The United States performed surprisingly well. Their squad contained several recent immigrants from Scotland, England, and Ireland who had grown up playing football before crossing the Atlantic. They reached the semi-finals, beating Belgium and Paraguay along the way. They lost to Argentina 6-1. No American team has gone further since. As the group stage unfolded, crowds in Montevideo slowly grew larger. Word spread through the city. This tournament was proving surprisingly entertaining. Street vendors appeared around stadium entrances. Hotels filled. The world suddenly felt smaller, not because distances had changed, but because football had brought distant places together. Eventually, only 4 teams remained: Argentina, Uruguay, United States, Yugoslavia. Both semi-finals were one-sided. Argentina defeated the United States 6-1. Uruguay defeated Yugoslavia by the same score. The final brought Uruguay against Argentina. Few football rivalries run so deep. The two countries face each other across the Rio de la Plata. The distance between Buenos Aires and Montevideo is short. On a clear day, they almost feel like neighboring cities separated by water. They share language, food, music, immigration, and a history that made them the closest of rivals. In the days before the final, ferries crossing the river became crowded with Argentine supporters. Thousands made the journey. Hotels sold out. Restaurants overflowed. Even the match ball became a dispute. Argentina preferred one model. Uruguay preferred another. Neither would budge. FIFA reached an unusual solution. Argentina's ball for the first half, Uruguay's for the second. It remains one of the stranger compromises in World Cup history. On the afternoon of July 30th, the Estadio Centenario finally welcomed the match it had been built to host. Nearly 90,000 people squeezed inside. Thousands more remained outside, hoping simply to hear the roar of the crowd. Argentina settled more quickly. Their passing looked sharper. Midway through the first half, they took the lead, then scored again. At halftime, they led 2-1. Inside the dressing room, Uruguay's players reportedly spoke very little. No dramatic speech, no famous motivational quotation preserved by history, only the understanding that 45 minutes remained. Sometimes that is enough. The second half felt different almost immediately. The equalizer arrived, then another goal. Then, with only minutes remaining, Héctor Castro headed the ball into the net. Castro was known throughout Uruguay as El Manco Divino, the divine one-armed man. When he was 13 years old, he had lost his right forearm in an accident involving an electric saw. Many assumed his sporting life was over before it had truly begun. Instead, he adapted. He learned a new balance, a different way to jump, a different way to shield the ball. The disability never disappeared. Neither did his determination. 4-2. The first World Cup belonged to Uruguay. Church bells rang across Montevideo. Ships in the harbor answered with their horns. People flooded into the streets carrying flags, embracing strangers, singing long into the winter evening. Across the river in Buenos Aires, the mood could not have been more different. Some Argentine newspapers criticized the officiating. Supporters gathered outside the Uruguayan consulate. Windows were broken. Diplomatic relations between the two countries cooled dramatically. Football, it turned out, was already capable of influencing politics. It would not be the last time. FIFA's experiment had succeeded, barely. No one present could have imagined that the tournament they had just witnessed would one day become the largest recurring sporting event on earth. To them, it had simply been an excellent football competition. History would take care of the rest. Chapter 2: 1934 and 1938. Mussolini, a continent growing dark and football under the shadow of war. By the time the Second World Cup arrived, the world already looked different. Only 4 years had passed, yet it felt like an entirely different decade. The optimism of the 1920s had largely disappeared. The Great Depression had reached almost every industrial nation. Factories stood silent. Banks had failed. Families that had once considered themselves comfortably middle class now waited in breadlines. In Germany, unemployment climbed into the millions. In Britain, entire mining towns struggled to survive. Across Europe, people were not simply losing money, they were losing confidence. And uncertainty, as history keeps demonstrating, creates opportunities for certainty's loudest voices. One of those voices was Benito Mussolini's. By 1934, he had ruled Italy for more than a decade. His image appeared everywhere, on government buildings, inside classrooms, across newspapers. His portrait hung in offices where previous generations had displayed kings. Mussolini understood something many politicians before him had only begun to suspect. Sport could be useful. Victories created pride. Pride encouraged loyalty, and loyalty strengthened governments. Long before television existed, sport had already become politics by other means. The World Cup offered an opportunity unlike any Italy had previously received. Millions would follow the tournament through newspapers and radio broadcasts. Foreign journalists would arrive from across Europe. Italy would present an image of itself, modern, efficient, powerful. Exactly the image Mussolini wanted the world to see. Uruguay, the defending champions, did not come. They cited the lack of European participation in 1930 and declined. They remained the only defending champion never to defend their title. Italy progressed through the tournament with the confidence of a host nation that understood the stakes. One quarter-final against Spain became particularly notorious. The first match finished level after an exceptionally physical contest. Several players left the field injured. A replay was required. Spain had players unavailable because of injuries suffered in the first meeting. Italy won. Afterwards, Spanish officials questioned the refereeing. Rumors spread almost immediately. Had officials favored the hosts? Had political pressure influenced decisions? No conclusive evidence has ever emerged, yet suspicion proved remarkably durable. Even today, historians continue debating individual incidents from that tournament. Italy reached the final against Czechoslovakia. The match remained tense throughout. Czechoslovakia scored. Silence spread through the Italian crowd. Italy equalized. Extra time followed. Finally, Angelo Schiavio scored the winning goal. Italy were world champions. Mussolini met the Italian team afterward. The photograph survived. He appears satisfied. The players appear relieved. Victory had become more than victory. It had become propaganda. While Italy celebrated football, Europe continued changing. In Germany, Adolf Hitler had become chancellor only the previous year. Within months, democratic institutions began disappearing. Political opponents were arrested. Books were burned. Jewish citizens increasingly found themselves excluded from public life. The continent was shifting, slowly enough that many people failed to recognize it, quickly enough that history would soon remember it forever. The next World Cup would arrive only 4 years later. Europe would look darker still. The 1938 tournament was held in France. By then, football was no longer Europe's biggest story. War was approaching. Austria had been annexed by Nazi Germany in March 1938, only 3 months before the tournament began. The operation was called the Anschluss. Austria ceased to exist as an independent state. Its national football team disappeared almost overnight. Austria's greatest player, Matthias Sindelar, declined to represent Nazi Germany. His decision has been discussed ever since. He cited age and injury. Many historians believe there was more to the story. Less than a year later, he was found dead in his Vienna apartment. The official explanation was carbon monoxide poisoning. Whether it was accident, suicide, or something darker remains one of football's enduring mysteries. History occasionally leaves unanswered questions that become larger than any definitive answer ever could. Spain never arrived. The country was fighting itself. Civil war had consumed towns, villages, and entire communities. Football had become irrelevant. Survival came first. Italy won again. They beat Hungary 4-2 in the final in Paris. Vittorio Pozzo remains the only coach to have won 2 men's World Cups. That achievement has survived every generation that followed. 3 months after the tournament ended, German forces crossed into Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war. The Second World War had begun. Everything changed. Footballers became soldiers. Stadiums became military depots, hospitals, or ruins. The World Cup disappeared. For 12 years, the Jules Rimet Trophy remained locked away, its future uncertain. There is one final story from those years worth remembering. As Nazi Germany expanded across Europe, FIFA Vice President Ottorino Barassi secretly removed the World Cup trophy from a bank vault in Rome and hid it inside a simple shoebox beneath his bed. There it remained throughout much of the war. While cities burned and armies crossed continents, the most important trophy in world football rested quietly beneath one man's bed. History is full of moments like that. Small acts of ordinary courage hidden inside extraordinary times. When peace finally returned, the trophy emerged with it. The World Cup had survived. Europe had survived, barely, but both had been changed forever. Chapter 3, 1950 and 1954. Brazil's Dream, the Maracanazo, and the Miracle of Bern. When the World Cup finally returned, 12 years had disappeared. The Second World War had reached nearly every corner of Europe. More than 70 million people lost their lives. Entire cities vanished beneath bombing campaigns. Players who had once traveled across Europe chasing trophies now crossed the same continent wearing military uniforms. Some returned, many did not. When peace arrived in 1945, it did not feel like peace straight away. Streets remained filled with damaged buildings. Families searched for missing relatives. Governments searched for stability. The political map of the world had changed almost overnight. Germany had been divided into occupation zones controlled by the victorious Allies, zones that would soon become 2 separate nations. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the world's 2 dominant powers. Their rivalry would shape international politics for nearly half a century. Newspapers soon began using a phrase that sounded strangely peaceful: the Cold War. There was very little peaceful about it. While Europe rebuilt itself, Brazil looked toward the future with unusual optimism. Its cities continued growing, its industries expanded. Millions of people moved from rural communities into rapidly developing urban centers. Brazil increasingly viewed itself not merely as South America's largest country, but as one of the great nations of the future. Hosting the World Cup became part of that vision, so Brazil built the Maracana. At its opening, it was the largest football stadium ever built, with an official capacity approaching 200,000. From above, it resembled a concrete city more than a sports venue. Brazil went through the group stage demolishing opponents, 7 goals against Sweden, 6 against Spain. Newspapers across the country stopped asking whether Brazil would become world champion. Instead, they debated how large the celebration should be. The morning newspaper O Mundo printed thousands of copies declaring Brazil world champions before the decisive match had even been played. Photographs of the players appeared beneath triumphant headlines. Congratulations had already been written. The match was against Uruguay. Uruguay needed to win. Brazil needed only a draw. The Maracanazo. On July 16, 1950, Rio de Janeiro woke believing it was already world champion. The crowd at the Maracana was estimated at between 190,000 and 210,000, the largest attendance ever recorded for a football match. Journalists from dozens of countries later described the same experience. The noise before kickoff was not simply loud, it was physical. Uruguay arrived as massive underdogs. No one expected them to win. Some foreign journalists predicted a comfortable Brazilian victory. Even many Uruguayan supporters privately admitted that a draw seemed unlikely. Their captain, Obdulio Varela, noticed something curious before kickoff. Brazilian newspapers celebrating victory, already celebrating. Varela reportedly gathered several copies from the floor of the dressing room. He encouraged his teammates to look at them carefully, not with anger, with patience. Whether every word of what followed survives exactly as spoken hardly matters. The story survived because it captures something true about sport. Sometimes being underestimated becomes motivation enough. The first half remained tense, far more tense than Brazil had expected. Uruguay defended patiently. Brazil attacked continuously. Neither side scored. Only 2 minutes after the second half began, relief arrived. Friaça scored for Brazil, 1-0. The Maracana exploded. People embraced complete strangers. Hats disappeared into the air. Musicians played. The celebrations were not those of people hoping to become world champions. They were the celebrations of people who believed they already were. Brazil still needed only a draw. Everything still pointed towards celebration. Uruguay refused to accept the script. Their captain, Varela, did something that has become almost legendary. Rather than allowing Brazil to restart immediately, he slowly picked the ball out of the net, then walked toward the referee. Very slowly, he argued, not because he expected the goal to be overturned, but because he wanted the stadium to become quiet. The celebration had become almost uncontrollable. If he could slow the match, perhaps he could slow the crowd, perhaps he could slow Brazil. By the time play resumed, the noise had softened. Sometimes leadership looks surprisingly simple. Midway through the second half, Juan Alberto Schiaffino arrived inside the penalty area, struck first time and equalized, 1-1. For the first time all afternoon, the Maracana became uncertain, not silent, not yet, uncertain. Then came the 79th minute. Alcides Gijia accelerated along the right wing. Brazilian defenders expected a cross. The goalkeeper expected the same. Instead, Gijia shot, low near post. The ball crossed the line. Uruguay led 2-1. For several seconds, nobody seemed entirely certain what had happened. Then, the scoreboard changed. The greatest crowd in football history fell almost completely silent. Journalists from dozens of countries described exactly the same experience. Silence, not disappointment, not shouting, silence. The Uruguayan goalkeeper, Roque Maspoli, later reflected that he had never experienced anything comparable. The silence, he said, was louder than the cheering had been. Nearly 200,000 people saying nothing. Uruguay were world champions. Their players celebrated carefully, almost cautiously. They understood where they were. Some later admitted that celebrating too enthusiastically felt inappropriate. Jules Rimet walked onto the field carrying the trophy himself and handed it to Uruguayan captain Varela with almost no ceremony at all. The greatest upset in World Cup history had caught even FIFA by surprise. For Brazil, the consequences extended far beyond football. Goalkeeper Moacir Barbosa became the symbol of the defeat. Generations of supporters associated the decisive goal with him. He carried that burden for the rest of his life. Decades later, when Brazil prepared for another World Cup, he reportedly visited the national team's training camp. Officials politely asked him to leave. Some believed his presence brought bad luck. Years afterward, Barbosa offered a sentence that still feels heartbreaking. In Brazil, he said, the maximum prison sentence is 30 years. I have been serving mine for much longer. The match received a name, the Maracanazo, the blow at the Maracana. It has never been forgotten. The Miracle of Bern. 4 years after the silence of the Maracana, the World Cup arrived in Switzerland. Very few people expected West Germany to win. The overwhelming favorites were Hungary, one of the greatest football teams anyone had ever seen. They had gone more than 4 years without losing a single match. At their center stood Ferenc Puskás, short, powerfully built, possessing perhaps the finest left foot in world football. Opponents frequently looked overwhelmed before kickoff had even arrived. In the group stage, Hungary scored 8 goals against West Germany, 3-8. The Germans looked hopelessly outmatched. What almost nobody realized was that West Germany's manager, Sepp Herberger, had already begun thinking about the knockout rounds. He rested key players during that heavy defeat. Whatever the full truth, Germany quietly continued progressing. Rain began falling over Bern on the day of the final. Steady, persistent, players slipped across the wet grass. Journalists later called it the Fritz Walter weather, after Germany's captain, famously comfortable in damp conditions. Hungary attacked immediately. Within 8 minutes, they led 2-0. Around Europe, supporters nodded knowingly. The inevitable. West Germany refused to cooperate. Only 2 minutes later, Max Morlock scored, 2-1. Then Helmut Rahn equalized, 2-2. The impossible had begun to appear possible. With only 6 minutes remaining, Rahn struck again, 3-2. Hungary pressed desperately. Puskás appeared to equalize in the closing moments. The goal was ruled offside. The whistle blew. West Germany were world champions. The famous German radio commentator Herbert Zimmermann nearly lost his voice during the closing minutes. His commentary became part of national memory. His words growing louder, faster, more emotional. He sounded less like a journalist than a witness, struggling to believe what he was seeing. Decades later, recordings of that broadcast would still be played on German television whenever the Miracle of Bern was remembered. For a country still emerging from the ruins of the Second World War, still living with the weight of moral defeat, the World Cup provided something that transcended football. Millions of ordinary Germans experienced uncomplicated joy together. The historian Joachim Fest later argued that the victory accomplished something politicians had struggled to achieve. It restored confidence, not in conquest, but in the future. For Hungary, defeat was almost impossible to comprehend. How could the world's greatest team lose the one match that mattered most? Football occasionally refuses logic. That uncertainty is precisely why people continue watching. If the strongest team always won, the World Cup would become predictable. Instead, it became unforgettable. Chapter 4: 1958 and 1962. Pelé, television, and the world learns a new name. History has an unusual habit. Just as one generation begins believing it has seen everything, someone entirely new appears. By the late 1950s, many football supporters believed the game's greatest stories had already been written. Uruguay's miracle, Italy's dynasty, the tragedy of the Maracanazo, West Germany's impossible victory in Bern. Surely football could not continue producing moments of that scale. It could. Because somewhere in the Brazilian countryside, a teenager was preparing to change the sport forever. His name was Edson Arantes do Nascimento. The world would remember him by another name, Pelé. The late 1950s felt different from the years immediately after the war. Europe was rebuilding at remarkable speed. Factories reopened, railways expanded. For millions of ordinary families, life slowly became more comfortable than their parents had imagined possible. This optimism extended far beyond Europe. Across Asia and Africa, old empires were beginning to disappear. India had already gained independence. Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African colony to achieve independence in 1957. More nations would soon follow. Technology was changing just as quickly. Commercial air travel expanded rapidly during the 1950s. Television also entered millions of homes. Not everywhere, not yet, but enough to begin transforming the relationship between sport and spectators. The World Cup was no longer something people simply read about in tomorrow's newspaper. Increasingly, they could watch it. Football had always produced heroes. Television turned those heroes into international celebrities. The timing could not have been better for one extraordinary young Brazilian. Pelé was born in October 1940 in a quiet town in the Brazilian state of Minas Gerais. His father had also played football, good enough to dream, not fortunate enough to become famous. Like countless fathers throughout sporting history, he quietly passed that dream to his son. Money was limited, very limited. The family often struggled to make ends meet. Stories from Pelé's childhood have become almost legendary. Some are certainly true. Others have probably grown slightly larger through repetition. That happens whenever childhood belongs to a future legend. One story tells of him practicing with a ball made from rolled-up newspapers tied with string. Another describes him using a grapefruit when nothing else was available. Whether every detail is perfectly accurate almost becomes beside the point. Pelé did not grow up surrounded by luxury. He grew up surrounded by imagination. Brazil itself still carried emotional scars from 1950. Adults remembered the Maracanazo vividly. Children heard the stories. For young footballers, becoming world champion meant more than winning a tournament. It meant correcting history. That burden would eventually fall upon a teenager. Sweden welcomed the 1958 World Cup with remarkable enthusiasm. Unlike previous tournaments, this one benefited from an expanding television audience. Electronics shops frequently placed televisions inside display windows. People gathered on sidewalks to watch matches together. Pubs filled earlier than usual. Football was beginning to move into people's homes. A child watching Pelé in Stockholm might decide to become a footballer in Glasgow, or Naples, or Buenos Aires. Television had quietly erased distance. Brazil began the tournament without Pelé in the starting lineup. A knee injury had delayed his involvement. For 2 matches, he watched from the sidelines. Then, finally, he stepped onto the field. The history of football would never look quite the same again. A boy named Pelé. When Brazil faced Wales in the quarter-final, Pelé was still only 17 years old. 17. At that age, most people are still trying to understand who they are. Pelé was trying to win a World Cup. The pressure would have overwhelmed many experienced professionals. He hardly seemed to notice. Then, midway through the second half, the ball arrived at his feet inside the penalty area. Almost no space. A defender directly behind him, another in front. Most players would have looked for a pass. With one delicate touch, Pelé lifted the ball over the defender's foot. Before it reached the ground, he struck it into the corner of the net. One movement, 2 touches, goal. He had become the youngest player ever to score in a World Cup. The semi-final against France introduced another remarkable figure. Just Fontaine scored 13 goals during the 1958 World Cup. 13 in a single tournament. No player has ever scored more in one World Cup. The record has stood for generations. Brazil won 5 goals to 2. Pelé scored a hat-trick, a World Cup semi-final, a hat-trick at 17 years old. Then came the final against the host nation Sweden. The Swedish crowd gave the Brazilian team a standing ovation at the final whistle. They applauded their own defeat because they had just watched something they understood to be extraordinary. Brazil won 5-2. When the final whistle arrived, Pelé collapsed onto the grass in tears. Not quiet tears, uncontrollable tears. His teammate Didi wrapped an arm around him. For perhaps the first time during the tournament, Pelé looked his age. He had spent weeks carrying himself like a veteran. Now he looked like a teenager, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had happened. There is something deeply human about those photographs. Victory often arrives carrying emotions that pressure had postponed. For perhaps the first time, this success carried meaning far beyond football. For millions of people across Latin America, Africa, and parts of Asia, his rise suggested something larger. The center of football was no longer fixed. Talent could emerge anywhere. History could be rewritten by anyone. The 1962 World Cup was held in Chile, a country that had survived one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded. On May 22, 1960, the ground began to move. This time it did not stop. Buildings collapsed, roads split apart, bridges failed. Along the southern coast, the Pacific Ocean suddenly withdrew before returning as a series of devastating tsunami waves. Entire fishing villages vanished. Modern seismologists now estimate its magnitude at 9.5. The strongest earthquake ever instrumentally recorded. When international officials visited the country, many concluded the World Cup could not possibly be held there. The damage was too extensive. Another host should be found. Chile disagreed. Carlos Didborn, one of the tournament organizers, responded with a sentence that became part of football history. Because we have nothing, we must do everything. Sadly, Didborn suffered a fatal heart attack only weeks before the tournament began. He never saw it. One of the stadiums was later renamed in his honor. Sometimes history allows people to build something they never live long enough to witness. The tournament itself contained one match now known simply as the Battle of Santiago, Chile against Italy in the group stage. Within the first 12 minutes, 2 Italian players had been sent off, one for breaking an opponent's nose, one for kicking an opponent in the groin. The Chilean players retaliated repeatedly. Police officers entered the field more than once. Television commentators openly admitted that what viewers were watching scarcely resembled football. The BBC commentator David Coleman described it as the most stupid, appalling, disgusting and disgraceful exhibition of football. Even that sentence somehow feels too gentle. English referee Ken Aston left the field exhausted. He later reflected that his greatest difficulty had not been making decisions, but communicating them. Supporters often had no idea why play had stopped. Several years later, while driving through London, Aston stopped at a traffic light, red, amber, green. The idea appeared almost instantly. Simple colors, immediately recognizable, yellow, red, no translation required. The system debuted at the 1970 World Cup. Pelé was injured in the second group match and never returned. Brazil won the tournament without him. Back-to-back world champions. Garrincha stepped forward in Pelé's absence. His nickname meant Little Bird. One leg was shorter than the other. His knees bent in unusual directions. Doctors had doubted he would become an athlete at all. Defenders eventually wished those doctors had been correct. Trying to predict Garrincha's next movement became almost impossible. Even he sometimes appeared surprised by it. Yet the ball obeyed him. Crowds loved him because he played with visible joy. Football looked less like work when Garrincha had possession. That Brazil could win a World Cup without Pelé perhaps said more about the team than any single victory could. Sometimes greatness lies not only in remarkable individuals, sometimes it lies in remarkable teams. Chapter 5: 1966 and 1970, England's finest hour and Brazil's greatest team. By the middle of the 1960s, the World Cup had quietly become something its founders could never have imagined: a television event. In 1930, supporters learned results from newspapers, sometimes the following morning, sometimes several days later. Radio shortened the distance, television almost eliminated it. Entire families now gathered around living room sets to watch football together. Neighbors visited because only one household on the street owned a television. Children sat cross-legged on carpets. Parents stood behind sofas because every chair had already been taken. For 90 minutes, thousands of ordinary homes became small football stadiums. The 1960s had also become a decade of extraordinary cultural transformation. Young people listened to different music than their parents. Fashion changed, cinema changed, politics changed. Only a few years earlier, most people experienced history through newspapers. Now they watched it happen, live. The World Cup benefited enormously from that change. England felt like the perfect host. Modern association football had been written into formal rules there in the 19th century. British sailors, railway engineers, and merchants had helped spread the game around the world. Yet, despite giving the sport to the world, England had never won the World Cup. Months before kickoff, something extraordinary happened. The Jules Rimet Trophy was stolen from a public stamp exhibition in Westminster. Police searched houses and followed false leads. Then, entirely by accident, an ordinary man walking his dog discovered a small package hidden beneath a hedge in South London. Inside lay the trophy. The dog's name was Pickles. Almost overnight, he became one of the most famous dogs in Britain. History occasionally rewards those with no intention of making history at all. England progressed through the tournament methodically. Manager Alf Ramsey believed discipline mattered as much as brilliance. Bobby Charlton, Bobby Moore, Martin Peters, Geoff Hurst. The final against West Germany was one of the most dramatic ever played. Germany scored first. England responded. Germany equalized in the final seconds of normal time. Extra time followed. Then came the most debated moment in World Cup history. Geoff Hurst struck the ball powerfully. It crashed against the underside of the crossbar, bounced down, and was cleared. The referee hesitated, then turned towards Soviet linesman Tofim Bakramov. After a brief conversation, the goal was awarded. England led. To this day, people continue debating whether the ball crossed the line. Computer simulations have reached different conclusions. Photographs remain inconclusive. Perhaps that uncertainty explains why the moment has survived for 60 years. Some sporting mysteries refuse to disappear. England eventually won 4-2. Hurst completed the only hat-trick ever scored in a men's World Cup final. Captain Bobby Moore climbed the steps of Wembley to receive the Jules Rimet trophy from Queen Elizabeth II. England had finally achieved what generations believed inevitable. They have never managed it again. The 1970 World Cup traveled to Mexico, the first to be broadcast in color television. The timing of matches was adjusted to accommodate European broadcast schedules, meaning many games kicked off at noon in the Mexican heat. A decision made for television revenue that players found genuinely dangerous. Brazil won every match they played. Their squad contained an embarrassment of talent. Carlos Alberto, Clodoaldo, Gerson, Rivellino, Tostão, Jairzinho, and Pelé. Jairzinho scored in every single game Brazil played. Group stage, quarter-final, semi-final, final. No player before or since has managed that achievement in a World Cup won by his team. The final against Italy produced perhaps the most celebrated team goal in football history. Brazil passed with extraordinary patience. Italy chased shadows. Eventually, Pelé rolled a perfectly weighted pass toward captain Carlos Alberto, arriving at full pace from the right. He struck first time. The ball crashed into the corner. Commentators around the world almost laughed in disbelief. Football could be played like this? Apparently it could. Brazil won 4-1. They had now won the World Cup 3 times, which under FIFA rules entitled them to permanent possession of the Jules Rimet trophy. They took it home to Rio de Janeiro, where it was kept at the Brazilian Football Confederation headquarters. In 1983, thieves broke through a concrete wall. The trophy disappeared. Despite international investigations, it was never recovered. Most historians believe it was melted down for its gold. The trophy presented today is not the same one Pelé lifted in Mexico. That original chapter ended long ago. As Brazil celebrated what many still consider the greatest team performance in World Cup history, another revolution was gathering strength in Europe. It began in the Netherlands, with a tall, elegant footballer who believed every player should be able to play every position. His name was Johan Cruyff, and he was about to change football forever. Chapter 6, 1974, 1978, and 1982. Total Football, A Nation in Darkness, and Italy's Long Road Back. By the early 1970s, football had become unmistakably global. But it was also changing tactically in ways nobody had anticipated. Throughout most of football's history, every player understood where they belonged. Goalkeepers stayed in goal, defenders defended, forwards scored. The lines separating those roles felt almost permanent. Then a group of Dutch coaches began asking a simple question: what if those lines did not exist at all? The idea became known as total football. Players rotated freely between positions. Movement became constant. Space mattered more than names. No player embodied that revolution more completely than Johan Cruyff. Tall, elegant, almost impossibly intelligent. Watching Cruyff often felt different from watching other footballers. He rarely appeared rushed. He seemed to arrive exactly where the game intended to go next. Many great players react quickly. Cruyff appeared to react before events had actually happened. The Netherlands reached the 1974 World Cup final. Their opponents were West Germany. Before a German player had touched the ball, the Dutch had already scored. Johan Neeskens converted from the penalty spot after Cruyff was fouled in the German area. The Netherlands led before Germany had completed a single pass. West Germany came back. Patiently, methodically, they won 2-1. Total football had lost. Yet ideas do not require trophies to survive. Cruyff's influence would eventually shape the careers of Guardiola, Wenger, Van Gaal, and a generation of managers that followed. Modern football still carries traces of his imagination. Cruyff never won the World Cup. For years, many believed he had boycotted the 1978 World Cup because it was held under Argentina's military dictatorship. The story was widely reported. Then, decades later, the truth emerged. The previous year, armed men had broken into his home in Barcelona. He and his family had been tied up at gunpoint during a kidnapping attempt. The experience profoundly affected him. Traveling to Argentina no longer felt important. Protecting his family did. History often invents dramatic explanations. Reality is frequently quieter and far more human. The world behind the 1978 tournament. In March 1976, Argentina's military seized power. A junta assumed control. General Jorge Rafael Videla became the country's leader. Official statements promised order and national renewal. Many citizens hoped political violence might finally end. Instead, it intensified. What followed became known as the Dirty War. Thousands of people disappeared. Students, journalists, trade union members, teachers, artists. Sometimes because they opposed the government, sometimes because someone suspected they might, sometimes because someone made a mistake. Families searched endlessly for answers. Most found none. A new word entered Argentina's everyday language. Desaparecidos, the disappeared. Meanwhile, only a few kilometers from River Plate Stadium, where the World Cup final would eventually be played, stood a naval complex known as ESMA. Officially, it was a training academy. In reality, it became one of the regime's largest secret detention centers. Survivors later recalled hearing crowds celebrating football matches while they remained imprisoned inside. Pause for a moment and imagine that contrast. A stadium filled with singing supporters. Just beyond it, locked rooms, interrogations, silence. History rarely separates joy and tragedy as neatly as we would like. Sometimes they exist on the very same afternoon, in the very same city. The junta used the tournament as Mussolini had used 1934, as a demonstration of national strength and organizational competence. Streets were cleaned, stadiums were ready, flags were everywhere. Foreign journalists who ventured beyond approved areas occasionally encountered situations that discouraged further exploration. Argentina won the tournament. Mario Kempes scored 6 goals, the ticker tape falling from the upper tiers of the monumental stadium before the final had even begun became the defining visual of that tournament. The final, Argentina v Netherlands, June 25, 1978. Estadio Monumental, Buenos Aires. Attendance, 71,483. Argentina led 1-0 through Kempes in the 68th minute. With only 8 minutes remaining, Rob Rensenbrink struck the post for the Netherlands. The ball bounced away. It had been inches from crossing the line. Inches from changing everything. The Dutch equalized in the 90th minute through Naninga. Extra time followed. Kempes scored again in the 104th minute. Bertoni added a third. Argentina won 3-1. The celebrations across Buenos Aires continued through the night. Whether the joy was entirely clean remained a question history would ask long after the confetti had settled. Before Argentina's decisive group match against Peru, they knew exactly how many goals they needed to advance. They needed to win by 4. They won by 6. Peru, a side that had competed creditably throughout the tournament, simply collapsed. Their goalkeeper was born in Argentina. Their government had recently received a significant grain shipment from Buenos Aires. Several Peruvian officials later admitted to feeling unusual political pressure before the match. No conclusive evidence of a fix has ever been established. Football, unfortunately, has always left room for doubt. The 1978 World Cup, Argentina. When the tournament finally arrived, Argentina looked exactly as the junta had hoped. The streets were clean, the stadiums were ready, the flags were everywhere. Visitors arriving from Europe described orderly airports, efficient transport, and enthusiastic crowds. Some noticed other things. Journalists who asked difficult questions sometimes found their credentials revoked. Foreign reporters who ventured beyond approved areas occasionally encountered situations that discouraged further exploration. The official Argentina presented to the world and the Argentina that existed behind it occupied the same geography, but not quite the same reality. On the pitch, Argentina moved with the electric urgency of a nation performing for history. Mario Kempes was their most dangerous player. He had spent the previous 2 years playing in Spain. Coming home, he seemed transformed, faster, more decisive, almost unstoppable. The tournament structure allowed Argentina to benefit from one particular arrangement that would later become deeply controversial. Group stage results from different pools could affect advancement. Before their final group match against Peru, Argentina knew exactly how many goals they needed. They needed to win by 4. They won by 6 goals to nil. Peru, a side that had competed creditably throughout the tournament, simply collapsed. Their goalkeeper was born in Argentina. Their government had recently received a significant grain shipment from Buenos Aires. Several Peruvian officials later admitted to feeling unusual political pressure before the match. No conclusive evidence of a fix has ever been established. Football, unfortunately, has always left room for doubt. The final, Argentina v Netherlands, June 25, 1978, Estadio Monumental, Buenos Aires. Attendance 71,483. The Netherlands reached the final without Cruyff, who had remained in Europe. For the Dutch, reaching a second consecutive final without their greatest player demonstrated extraordinary collective strength. For Argentina, the final felt less like a match than a coronation. Ticker tape reigned from the upper tiers of the monumental stadium before a ball had been kicked. The noise was almost physical. In the 68th minute, Mario Kempes scored. Argentina won, Netherlands 0. With only 8 minutes remaining, Rob Rensenbrink struck the post for the Netherlands. The ball bounced away. Replays showed it had been inches from crossing the line, inches from changing everything. Instead, the Dutch equalized in the 90th minute through Naninga. Extra time. Kempes scored again in the 104th minute. Bertoni added a third. Argentina won 3-1. Kempes finished as the tournament's top scorer with 6 goals. The celebrations across Buenos Aires continued through the night. For one evening, the junta shared something with the Argentine people: joy. Whether the joy was entirely clean remained a question history would ask long after the confetti had settled. The 1982 World Cup, Spain. By 1982, the world had changed considerably. The Cold War had intensified. Ronald Reagan sat in the White House. Margaret Thatcher governed Britain. Pope John Paul II had survived an assassination attempt. AIDS had appeared, though few yet understood what it was. And Argentina had invaded the Falkland Islands. The conflict lasted 74 days. Nearly 900 people died. Britain reclaimed the islands. The Argentine junta, humiliated by defeat, began its final collapse. Into this world came the 1982 World Cup. 24 teams for the first time. An expanded tournament with more matches, more drama, and more opportunity for the unexpected. The tournament produced one match that supporters still discuss 4 decades later. Group stage. Brazil versus Italy. Brazil were the most entertaining team in the tournament. Zico, Socrates, Falcao, Jr., an extraordinary collection of attacking talent. Italy had scraped through the group stage with 3 draws. Their football was frequently criticized as defensive and uninspiring. Critics openly questioned whether they deserved to advance. Paolo Rossi had returned to football only months earlier after serving a 2-year ban for his involvement in a match-fixing scandal. He had barely played, he was not in form. Several Italian supporters wondered why he was in the squad at all. Then he scored 3 goals in 40 minutes against Brazil. Brazil needed only a draw to advance. They pursued the match too openly. Italy struck on the counter. Again and again, Italy won 3-2. Brazil were eliminated. Paulo Roberto Falcao, who had scored a brilliant equalizer for Brazil, sat on the pitch after the final whistle and stared at the grass for a long time. He was 30 years old. It was his only World Cup. He would never play in another. The semi-final, West Germany for France, July 8, 1982, Estadio Ramon Sanchez Pizjuan, Seville. Attendance 63,000. What happened in Seville became one of football's most discussed and most controversial matches. France and West Germany produced a match of extraordinary quality and extraordinary brutality. Michel Platini had made France one of Europe's most exciting teams. In the second half, with the score level, French substitute Patrick Battiston burst through on goal. German goalkeeper Harald Schumacher came out. Battiston reached the ball first. Schumacher arrived afterward. His hip connected with Battiston's jaw. The French player lay unconscious on the pitch for several minutes. He lost 2 teeth. He cracked 2 ribs. He had sustained what would later be identified as cervical vertebra damage. Schumacher was not booked, not cautioned, simply allowed to continue playing. French supporters have not forgotten. They never will. The match went to extra time. France led 3-1. West Germany scored twice to force a penalty shootout, the first penalty shootout in World Cup history. West Germany won 5-4. It remains for many French supporters the most painful defeat their national team has ever experienced, not merely because they lost, because of what was not punished. The final, Italy und West Germany, July 11, 1982. Estadio Santiago Bernabeu, Madrid. Attendance 90,000. Italy faced West Germany in the final. Paolo Rossi scored first in the 57th minute. Marco Tardelli scored the second. When the ball crossed the line, Tardelli ran toward the crowd screaming, arms wide, face distorted with something beyond celebration. The image became one of the most reproduced photographs in football history. Not joy alone. Release. Alessandro Altobelli added a third. Germany scored a consolation. Italy won 3-1. Vittorio Pozzo's record of 2 consecutive World Cups now had a distant echo. Italy had won their third. They had joined Brazil as the only 3-time champions. Dino Zoff, the Italian captain and goalkeeper, lifted the trophy. He was 40 years old, the oldest player ever to lift the World Cup. History occasionally saves its finest moments for those patient enough to wait. Chapter 7, 1986 and 1990. The Hand of God, the goal of the century, and the most defensible final ever played by the middle of the 1980s. Football had become inseparable from television, not simply because matches were broadcast, because television had changed how football felt. Slow motion, multiple camera angles, instant replays, expert analysis, commercial breaks. The sport that millions had experienced through radio commentary and next-day newspaper reports had transformed into something closer to cinema. Goals could be replayed endlessly. Controversial moments could be examined from every angle. Players became recognizable across continents. The world itself was changing around football. The Soviet Union was weakening. Mikhail Gorbachev had introduced reforms that would eventually unravel an empire. In South Africa, Nelson Mandela remained imprisoned. Across much of Latin America, military dictatorships were slowly giving way to fragile democracies. The Cold War was entering its final decade, though almost nobody knew it yet. And in a stadium in Mexico City, a 34-year-old man from Buenos Aires was about to produce two moments that football would discuss forever. The 1986 World Cup, Mexico. Mexico hosted the 1986 tournament almost by accident. Colombia had originally been awarded the rights. Economic crisis forced them to withdraw. Mexico, which had hosted only 16 years earlier, stepped in. Then an earthquake struck. In September 1985, a magnitude 8 earthquake devastated Mexico City. Thousands of people died. Entire neighborhoods collapsed. The country was still rebuilding when the World Cup arrived the following summer. Yet Mexico hosted. This was the tournament of Diego Maradona. Whether he was the greatest footballer who ever lived remains one of sport's most enjoyable arguments. He was certainly one of the most complex. Born into poverty in the suburbs of Buenos Aires, discovered by a talent scout at the age of 8, playing professional football at 15, carrying the pressure of an entire nation from almost the moment he could walk. By 1986, he was 25 years old and the most famous footballer on earth. Also the most scrutinized, also the most criticized, also the most followed. Argentina needed him, not merely wanted, needed. The squad around him was talented but not extraordinary. Maradona was the difference between a good team and a great one. The road to the quarter-final. Argentina progressed through the group stage with characteristic efficiency. Maradona scored 3 goals before the knockout rounds had even begun. In the round of 16, Argentina beat Uruguay 1-0. Then came England. The context was impossible to ignore. Only 4 years earlier, Argentine and British forces had fought over the Falkland Islands. Nearly 900 people had died. Families on both sides carried grief that football could not dissolve. A football match cannot resolve a war. It cannot undo loss. It cannot bring back the dead. But on June 22, 1986, in the Estadio Azteca in Mexico City, 62 years after the two nations had played their first match, England and Argentina met in a World Cup quarter-final. The political history sat in the stands. Quarter-final. Argentina vs. England, June 22, 1986. Estadio Azteca, Mexico City. Attendance 114,580. The first half produced very little. England defended competently. Argentina probed without finding the decisive moment. Then, 6 minutes into the second half, Steve Hodge attempted to clear the ball back toward his goalkeeper. The clearance was imperfect. Maradona arrived in the penalty area at almost the same moment as the ball. What happened next has been discussed, argued, celebrated, condemned, replayed, analyzed, and retold thousands of times. Maradona punched the ball with his left fist. The ball crossed the line. The referee, who was poorly positioned, did not see the hand. The linesman did not flag. The goal was given. England's players protested immediately. Peter Shilton, the English goalkeeper, was furious. The referee remained unmoved. He had not seen it. What he could not see, he could not rule on. That, in the brutal logic of football, was enough. After the match, Maradona was asked about the goal. His answer became one of the most famous sentences in sporting history. A little with the head of Maradona and a little with the hand of God. He appeared to smile as he said it. England never entirely forgave him. Argentina never entirely apologized. Then came the second goal. 10 minutes after the first, Maradona received the ball just inside the Argentine half. What followed lasted 11 seconds. He drifted left, accelerated through the middle, past one English player, then another, then a third, then a fourth, beat the goalkeeper, beat a fifth defender attempting to clear, slid the ball into the net, 60 meters, 5 defenders, 11 seconds. The BBC commentator Barry Davies could barely find words. In the press box, an English journalist reportedly stood and applauded. He was applauding the goal that eliminated his own country. Some moments transcend loyalty. In 2002, a worldwide vote organized by FIFA named it the goal of the century. No subsequent vote has seriously challenged that verdict. Argentina won 2-1. The semi-final, Argentina v Belgium, June 25, 1986. Estadio Azteca, Mexico City. Attendance 110,420. The other semi-final attracted less attention than the quarter-final. But Maradona scored twice against Belgium as well, both goals of exceptional quality. Argentina won 2-0. Maradona had now scored 5 goals and created more chances than any other player in the tournament. He was not merely leading Argentina, he was carrying them. On the other side of the bracket, France had beaten Brazil in one of the great matches of the decade. Quarter-final, France vs Brazil, June 21, 1986. Estadio Jalisco, Guadalajara. Attendance 65,000. The two most attacking sides in the tournament met in a match that lived up to every expectation. Michel Platini for France, Zico, Socrates, Careca for Brazil. The match finished 1 goal each after extra time. Then came penalties. Zico had not started the match, entering as a substitute. He took Brazil's third penalty. He missed. Brazil were eliminated. Scrates, who had scored beautiful goals throughout the tournament, placed his penalty wide as well. He never played in another World Cup. He died in December 2011, aged 57, a few hours after watching Santos, his former club, win the Brazilian league. History occasionally allows certain endings to feel almost planned. France then lost their semi-final to West Germany on penalties as well. The final, Argentina FIFA. West Germany, June 29, 1986. Estadio Azteca, Mexico City. Attendance 114,600. The final produced a match worth of its setting. Argentina led 2-0 with 10 minutes remaining. West Germany, refusing to accept defeat, scored twice in 6 minutes. 2-2. Extra time appeared inevitable. Then, with 83 minutes played, Jorge Burruchaga received the ball in space. His run was perfectly timed. His finish was precise. 3-2. West Germany pressed desperately for the equalizer. It never came. Argentina won their second World Cup. Maradona lifted the trophy. He wept, not from joy alone, perhaps from the weight of everything that had brought him there, the poverty of his childhood, the pressure of a nation, the 11 seconds against England, the punch. History sometimes allows its most complicated figures to hold its most beautiful trophies. Diego Maradona was the tournament's best player by some distance. He won the Golden Ball. He remains the only player ever to carry a national team to a World Cup title almost entirely by himself, or so it seemed. The truth, as always, was slightly more complicated. but in memory, 1986 belongs to one man, it always will. The 1990 World Cup, Italy. If 1986 was the tournament of individual brilliance, 1990 was something quite different. The tournament returned to Italy. 8 years had passed since the last Italian World Cup. A generation had grown up watching football through a different television. The game had evolved, or perhaps it had not evolved quite enough, because Italia 90 produced the lowest scoring World Cup in history. The average goals per game fell below 2.5. Defensive football dominated. Teams that fell behind often stopped attacking. Draws proliferated. Critics complained throughout. Several matches drew audiences despite offering very little football worth watching. Yet memory has been unexpectedly kind to this tournament, not because of the football, because of the emotion. Nessun dorma. The BBC chose Puccini's aria as the theme for their coverage, a tenor voice rising through the familiar opening notes. People who had never attended an opera suddenly recognized it. Football and classical music had rarely seemed natural companions. For one summer, they became inseparable. The BBC's theme music is still played whenever Italia 90 is discussed. Memory is strange. It rarely stores what it should. It stores what felt true at the time. The road through the tournament. Cameroon became the story of the opening stages. They beat Argentina 1-0 in the very first match. The defending champions, with Maradona wearing the captain's armband, eliminated in the opening game. The result felt almost impossible. Roger Milla, 38 years old, had been coaxed out of retirement by the president of Cameroon himself. He scored 4 goals. After each one, he ran to the corner flag and danced. The dance became the tournament's defining image. Television audiences around the world watched and laughed with something close to delight. Football had remembered to be joyful. Cameroon reached the quarter-finals before losing to England 4-2 in extra time. Gary Lineker scored twice from the penalty spot. The semi-finals, Semi-final 1, Argentina v Italy, July 3, 1990, Stadio San Paolo, Naples. Attendance 59,978. Argentina vs Italy was played in Naples. Maradona had played for Napoli for years. He had helped them win the Italian league. He was loved in the city. He was also deeply complicated. Before the match, Maradona publicly suggested that Neapolitans were not truly Italian, that Italy had neglected the South for generations, that Neapolitans therefore had no obligation to support the national team. The statement was received in different ways. It reflected genuine historical grievance about Italy's North-South divide. It was also calculated to unsettle Italian supporters. The match finished 1 goal each after extra time. Argentina won on penalties, 4-3. Italy were eliminated in their own tournament. Roberto Baggio, the most gifted Italian player of his generation, watched from the stands. He had not made the squad. He would not make that mistake again in 4 years. Semi-final 2, West Germany v England, July 4, 1990, Stadio delle Alpi, Turin. Attendance 62,628. The other semi-final produced one of football's most remembered moments. Not a goal, not a tackle, not a controversy, a tear. England's Paul Gascoigne received a yellow card in the closing stages. He realized immediately what it meant. If England reached the final, he would miss it through suspension. His face collapsed. The tears came without warning. A 23-year-old crying in front of 60,000 people and millions watching on television. Football had seen tears before. Not like this, not so naked. The image was broadcast around the world. It became the face of the entire tournament. Not Maradona, not Schillaci, not Milla. A young English midfielder crying. England eventually lost on penalties. Stuart Pearce and Chris Waddle both missed. England have never reached a World Cup semi-final since. Gascoigne went on to have an extraordinary and deeply troubled life. Football genius, personal chaos, intermittent brilliance, persistent darkness. The tear in Turin somehow captured both the beauty and the cost of what sport demands from those who play it at the highest level. The final, West Germany felt Argentina, July 8, 1990. Stadio Olimpico, Rome. Attendance 73,3. The final is remembered primarily for what it lacked: goals, open play, joy. Two teams that had previously produced extraordinary football throughout their histories managed between them one goal from the penalty spot in the 85th minute. Andreas Bremer scored it for West Germany. Argentina had two players sent off. West Germany won 1-0. The match is the lowest rated World Cup final in terms of entertainment value, according to almost every subsequent assessment. Yet it produced one image: Maradona. At the final whistle, cameras found him weeping, but not with the tears of Pelé in Stockholm, not with joy, the tears of someone who had given everything and finished second. He would never lift the World Cup again. The following day, his face was on the front pages of newspapers around the world, not the champions, Maradona, because sometimes defeat carries more weight than victory, and because football, at its core, has always been about the players who feel it deepest. 3 months after the World Cup ended, the Berlin Wall had already been open for nearly a year. The Soviet Union continued its slow dissolution. Nelson Mandela had been released from prison 6 months earlier. The world was reorganizing itself. A decade defined by Cold War tension was closing. Something new was beginning. In 1991, Yugoslavia began to break apart. Several of the players who had competed in Italia '90 wearing the Yugoslav shirt would compete 4 years later, representing entirely new countries. History moves quickly when it decides to move. Football simply plays on. Chapter 8. 1994 and 1998. Football comes to America and Zidane lights up Paris. By 1994, the world had reorganized itself almost completely. The Soviet Union no longer existed. Germany had reunified. Nelson Mandela was preparing to become South Africa's first democratically elected president. The internet existed, but most people had never heard of it. A small company called Amazon was about to be founded in a garage in Seattle. The World Cup came to the United States. To many Europeans, this felt peculiar. Americans called it soccer. They watched it infrequently. Their professional leagues had collapsed more than once. Football was, to the United States, largely irrelevant. FIFA had a different calculation. The United States was the largest untapped football market in the world. 250 million people, enormous purchasing power, stadiums large enough to hold 90,000. If football could establish itself in America, the financial consequences for the sport would be transformative. Hosting the World Cup was the mechanism. The 1994 World Cup, United States 24 teams, 9 venues, 44 billion viewers across the planet according to FIFA's figures. The stadiums were genuinely enormous. The Pontiac Silverdome in Michigan was the first fully enclosed stadium to host World Cup matches. The Rose Bowl in Pasadena held over 94,000 for the final. Average attendance reached 68,000 per match, the highest in World Cup history, a record that still stands. Americans turned out in enormous numbers, not always because they loved football, sometimes simply because a ticket to a World Cup match felt like a cultural event worth attending, but they came. And on the screens in bars, restaurants, and living rooms, something slowly shifted. The tournament. Brazil arrived as favorites. Romário and Bebeto formed perhaps the most complementary striking partnership in the world. When Bebeto scored against the Netherlands in the quarterfinals, he celebrated by cradling an imaginary baby. His son had been born just days before the match. The celebration became one of the tournament's most recognizable images. His teammates joined him. 3 men rocking imaginary babies on the pitch of the Stanford Stadium. Football had become somehow intimate. The knockout stages round of 16, Germany 3-2, Belgium, Spain 3-0, Switzerland, Sweden 3-1, Saudi Arabia, Romania 3-2, Argentina after extra time, Netherlands 2-0, Ireland, Brazil 1-0, United States, Italy 2-1, Nigeria after extra time, Mexico versus Bulgaria 1-1. After extra time, Bulgaria won 3-1 on penalties. Quarter-finals, Italy 2-1, Spain, Netherlands 2-0, Brazil, Germany 1-0, Bulgaria, Matthäus penalty, Sweden 2-2, Romania, Sweden won 5-4 on penalties. Roberto Baggio saved Italy almost single-handedly. He had been left out of the 1990 squad. He had spent 4 years waiting. Now, against Nigeria in the round of 16, Italy were losing 1-0 with 2 minutes remaining. He equalized. In extra time, he scored again. Against Spain in the quarterfinals, he scored the only goal. Against Bulgaria in the semi-finals, he scored both goals in a 2-0 victory. He had never worked harder in his career. He had never needed to. Semi-finals. Semi-final 1. Italy v Bulgaria. July 13, 1994. Giants Stadium, New Jersey. Attendance 74,110. Roberto Baggio scored twice. Bulgaria created very little. Italy won 2-0. Semi-final 2. Brazil v Sweden. July 13, 1994, Rose Bowl, Pasadena. Attendance 84,169. Romario scored the only goal. Brazil won 1-0. Both semi-finals were decided by single goals. Both were largely comfortable. The final would prove very different. The final, Brazil vs Italy, July 17, 1994. Rose Bowl, Pasadena. Attendance 94,194. 130 years of football history had never produced a World Cup final without a goal in regular time. This one managed it. Brazil versus Italy, 0-0 after 90 minutes, 0-0 after extra time. The first World Cup final ever decided by penalties. Both sides had chances. Neither could finish. The occasion perhaps strangled what the football might otherwise have produced. Then came the shootout. Brazil scored their first 4 penalties. Italy needed to score all 5 to force sudden death. Baresi went first, one of the finest defenders in the history of the sport. He struck the ball straight and hard. Over the bar, Pagliuca saved from Marcio Santos. Albertini scored. Evani scored. Brazil needed one more to win. Massaro stepped forward. Taffarel saved. Brazil's 4th penalty won the trophy. Roberto Baggio needed to score to keep Italy alive. He had carried Italy through every knockout match. He had been the difference every time. He struck the ball cleanly, too high. The ball sailed over the crossbar. Brazil were world champions for the 4th time. Baggio stood at the penalty spot, head bowed, eyes closed, hands on hips. The image has appeared on magazine covers, in documentaries, in books, in art. It was not a photograph of failure. It was a photograph of what sport costs. Baggio was asked about it years later. He said he still dreamed about it. Not a nightmare, a presence, something that would never entirely leave. The 1998 World Cup, France. France in the summer of 1998 felt extraordinary. The country was prosperous, confident, cosmopolitan. The Channel Tunnel had opened only 4 years earlier. The euro was months away from becoming the common currency of 11 European nations. France itself was in the middle of a national conversation about identity, because this World Cup squad looked different from any previous French team, different from almost any national team in the world. Zinedine Zidane was the son of Algerian immigrants. Thierry Henry had parents from the Caribbean. Patrick Vieira had been born in Senegal. Marcel Desailly in Ghana. Christian Karembeu in New Caledonia. 32 nations compete in a World Cup. France's squad contained players with roots in 22 countries. Later, commentators would describe this as Black Blanc Bleu, Black, White and Arab, a France composed of France's full diversity. Whether this represented something the country had achieved or something it was still becoming depended very much on who you asked. Football, as always, did not resolve that question. It simply made it visible. The tournament. 32 teams for the first time. A genuinely global competition. Japan and South Korea had qualified for the first time in their histories. Jamaica made their debut. South Africa returned after decades of isolation. Croatia appeared for the first time as an independent nation. Their star player was Davor Šuker, a country of 4 million people, still recovering from a devastating war that had ended only 3 years earlier. They reached the semi-finals. Šuker won the Golden Boot with 6 goals. His country watched with something that felt larger than sport. Sometimes football offers nations a chance to exist in the world's attention in ways that nothing else provides. The knockout stages round of 16, Brazil 4-1, Chile, Nigeria 1-4, Denmark, Germany 2-1, Mexico, Argentina 2-2, England, Argentina won 4-3 on penalties, Italy 1-0, Norway, France 1-0, Paraguay, Laurent Blanc scored golden goal in extra time, Netherlands 2-1, Yugoslavia, Romania 0-1, Croatia. The Argentina-England match contained one of the great goals of the decade. Michael Owen, 18 years old, received the ball 30 meters from goal. He ran, not directly, diagonally, cutting through the Argentine defensive line at a pace that made 2 experienced defenders appear stationary. He shot, goal. It was the second great English goal against Argentina since Hurst in the 1966 final. Both times England would ultimately lose the match. Argentina won on penalties. David Beckham was sent off for kicking Diego Simeone. Paul Scholes and Paul Ince both missed. Beckham became the most vilified player in England for approximately 12 months. He emerged from it transformed. Sometimes the worst moments create the most resilient people. Quarter-finals. France 0-0. Italy. France won 4-3 on penalties. Brazil 3-2. Denmark, Netherlands 2-1. Argentina, Germany 3. Croatia, Germany against Croatia represented one of the tournament's most significant upsets. Croatia, independent for only 7 years, beat the 3-time world champions 3-0. Šuker scored twice. Robert Jarni scored one of the finest goals of the tournament. Germany, who had appeared in 7 of the previous 9 World Cup finals, were eliminated before the semi-finals. Semi-final 1. Brazil v Netherlands, July 7, 1998. Stade de France, Saint-Denis. Attendance 80,000. Brazil and the Netherlands produced a remarkable match that finished 1 goal each after extra time. Ronaldo had scored early. Patrick Kluivert equalized late. The penalty shootout was extraordinary. Taffarel saved from Philippe Cocu and Ronald de Boer. Brazil won 4-2. Ronaldo had scored in every match. He appeared unstoppable. Semi-final 2. France for Croatia. July 8, 1998. Stade de France Saint-Denis. Attendance 79,700. France were the superior team, but faced determined Croatian resistance. Lilian Thuram, the French right-back, had never previously scored an international goal. He scored twice, both goals coming after France had fallen behind. Schuker scored for Croatia, but France won 2-1. The country that had started as hosts was now one match from becoming champions. The final, France for Brazil, July 12, 1998. Stade de France, Saint-Denis. Attendance, 80,000. The morning of the final, a rumor spread through the Brazilian camp. Ronaldo. Something was wrong. He had suffered what was later described as a convulsive fit in his room hours before the match. He was taken to hospital, examined, cleared to play. Whether pressure from sponsors and sponsors' representatives influenced the decision to reinstate him remains one of the most debated questions in World Cup history. He appeared in the starting lineup. He played the match. He was not Ronaldo. He moved without his usual sharpness. He pressed without his usual intensity. He shot without his usual conviction. Brazil could not find their rhythm. Zidane found his. In the 27th minute, a corner arrived from the right. Zidane rose, headed, goal. In the 45th minute, another corner. Zidane rose again, headed again. 2 goals, both headers, both corners. The most technically complete player of his generation had scored twice before halftime in the World Cup final. France eventually won 3-0. Emmanuel Petit added a third in the final minute. The Champs-Élysées filled with 1 million people, black and white and Arab and Kanak and Caribbean, singing together in French. For one night at least, Zidane's face was projected onto the Arc de Triomphe, the son of Algerian immigrants, 30 foot high, at the center of France. Chapter 9, 2002 and 2006. Korea's miracle, Ronaldo's redemption, and a head that changed history. By 2002, football had entered a new century in more than the calendar sense. Television money had transformed the sport. Player salaries had reached levels unimaginable a generation earlier. European club football had become a global entertainment product. Champions League finals were watched by hundreds of millions. The best players moved between the great clubs of England, Spain, Italy, and Germany for transfer fees that exceeded the annual budgets of small nations. The World Cup remained something separate, something that could not be replicated by club football. Players who shared a club dressing room during the season became rivals every 4 years. That tension had always made the tournament unique. In 2002, it would be tested in ways nobody expected. The 2002 World Cup, South Korea and Japan. The first World Cup held in Asia. The first co-hosted tournament. The first held outside the traditional boundaries of European and South American football. South Korea and Japan had developed football rapidly through the 1990s. Professional leagues had been established. National infrastructure had improved. Crowds had grown. For FIFA, the tournament represented an investment in future growth. For Asian football supporters, it represented a rival. For the European and South American nations who traveled there expecting to dominate, it represented a revelation they had not anticipated. The group stage shocks. France were defending champions. In their opening match against Senegal, they were beaten 1-0. Senegal had never played in a World Cup before. Their squad contained players who had learned the game in France. Some were sons of immigrants. Others had simply grown up in the French football academy system. They beat the champions wearing jerseys that said Senegal. France failed to score in 3 matches. They were eliminated without a point. Argentina, one of the pre-tournament favorites, were also eliminated in the group stage. The entire pre-tournament hierarchy collapsed within days. The knockout stages round of 16, Germany 8-0, Saudi Arabia, Spain 1-1, Republic of Ireland, Spain won 3-2 on penalties, Sweden 2-1, Senegal after extra time, United States 2-0, Mexico, Brazil 2-0, Belgium, Japan 1-0, Tunisia, South Korea 2-1, Italy after extra time, England 1-0, Denmark, South Korea against Italy became the match that changed the tournament's narrative. Italy led through a Vieri goal. South Korea equalized in the last seconds of regular time through Seol Ki-hyun. In the second period of extra time, Ahn Jung-hwan headed the winning goal. He played his club football in Italy. His club immediately cancelled his contract. His country celebrated for 3 days. Quarter-finals, England 1-2. Brazil, Ronaldinho scored from a free kick that looped over Seaman. Germany 1-0, United States, South Korea 0-0, Spain, South Korea won 5-3 on penalties. Turkey 1-0 Senegal after extra time. The South Korea-Spain quarterfinal produced controversy that continues to be discussed. 2 Spanish goals were disallowed. One appeared perfectly legitimate to almost every observer. The Spanish goalkeeper Casillas kept a penalty shootout save that was ultimately irrelevant. South Korea advanced. Whether the officiating had been simply poor or something more deliberate remained a subject of fierce debate. FIFA has never officially addressed the question. Semi-finals. Semi-final 1. Germany v South Korea, June 25, 2002, Seoul World Cup Stadium. Attendance 65,256. Germany won 2-0. Michael Ballack scored both. He received a yellow card in the match that would suspend him from the final. He had scored in every knockout match. He won the Golden Ball. He would not play in the final. Semi-final 2, Brazil v Turkey, June 26, 2002, Saitama Stadium. Attendance 61,058. Brazil won 1-0. Ronaldo scored. He was not the Ronaldo who had stood on that Paris pitch 4 years earlier, vacant-eyed and uncertain. He had spent years rebuilding himself after serious knee injuries, 2 operations, long rehabilitation, questions about whether he would play professional football again. In Saitama, he looked like a different person, focused, sharp, decisive. There was a third story from 2002 that deserved far more attention than it received. Turkey. In the entire history of the World Cup, no nation has ever made their tournament debut and immediately reached the semi-finals. Turkey achieved something close. They had qualified for only one previous World Cup, in 1954, and had been eliminated in the group stage. 48 years later, they returned. Nobody expected what followed. Turkey's squad contained several players who had developed through European club football: Hasan Şaş, Yıldıray Baştürk, Bülent Korkmaz, and Hakan Şükür. A striker who had played in Italy and Germany, who had returned to Galatasaray, and who was considered one of the finest forwards in Turkish football history. Their manager was Şenol Güneş. Calm, methodical, deeply respected within Turkish football, he had built a system that worked. Turkey's group stage was competitive without being spectacular. They beat China 3-0. They drew with Costa Rica. They lost to Brazil 2-1. They advanced as one of the third-placed teams. Then the knockout stage began. Round of 16. Turkey v Japan, June 18, 2002, Miyagi Stadium. Attendance 45,666. Japan were co-hosts. Their supporters were overwhelming in their noise and their numbers. Turkey won 1-0. Ümit Davala scored. Turkey were in the quarterfinals of the World Cup for the first time in their history. Quarterfinal, Turkey v Senegal, June 22, 2002, Osaka Municipal Central Gymnasium Stadium. Attendance 44 to 33. Senegal had beaten France in the tournament's opening match. They were fast, organized and dangerous from set pieces. The match finished 0-0 after 90 minutes. In the first period of extra time, Henri Camara scored for Senegal. Turkey were losing. Then, in the 94th minute of the match, Ilhan Mansız scored to equalize. It was a golden goal tournament. Only one goal needed, but neither scored in the first extra time period. In the second period of extra time, Ilhan Mansız scored again. Turkey won 2-1. They were in the semi-finals. A nation of 65 million people that had waited 48 years between World Cup appearances was now in the final four of the greatest tournament in football. Semi-final, Turkey v Brazil, June 26, 2002. Saitama Stadium. Attendance 61,058. Brazil was simply too strong. Ronaldo scored in the 49th minute. Turkey fought back. They pressed. They created chances. But Brazil, who were on their way to the title, held on. Brazil won 1-0. Third place, playoff, Turkey v South Korea, June 29, 2002, Daegu Stadium. Attendance 63,483. The third place match took place 6 days after Turkey's semi-final defeat. South Korea, the host nation, had reached the semi-finals themselves in circumstances that had generated extraordinary controversy. They faced a Turkey side that had come further than almost anyone had imagined possible. Then Hakan Şükür scored, not just scored. Hakan Şükür scored after 10 seconds and 8/10. 10 seconds. The fastest goal in World Cup history. A record that stood in 2026 and will likely stand for many years to come. Turkey eventually won 3-2, third place in the World Cup, for a country making only their second ever appearance at the tournament. It remains the finest result in Turkish football history, and it will take something extraordinary to surpass it. When the Turkish team returned home, the reception was unlike anything the country had experienced for sport. Hundreds of thousands of people gathered in Istanbul and Ankara. The players were celebrated as national heroes. Şükür's goal had been broadcast live, then replayed again and again. 10 seconds, a lifetime. In any other tournament, the story of Turkey's 2002 World Cup would have been the story everyone was talking about. In 2002, it shared space with the Galacticos, Ronaldo's redemption, South Korea's miracle, Senegal's impossibility, and Germany's mechanical progression. History sometimes buries remarkable things beneath more remarkable things. Turkey's third place finish deserves to be remembered more clearly than it usually is, because it has not happened again, because it may not happen again for a very long time. The final, Brazil v Germany, June 30th, 2002, International Stadium, Yokohama. Attendance 69,029, Brazil and Germany. Combined, they had won 7 of the 20 previous World Cups. The match had been expected to produce something extraordinary. Instead, it produced something quietly perfect. Ronaldo in the 67th minute, Ronaldo again in the 79th minute. Both goals precise, both goals opportunistic, both goals reflecting the instinct of a player who had come further to reach this moment than almost anyone watching could fully understand. Brazil won 2-0. Ronaldo won the Golden Shoe with 8 goals. When he lifted the trophy, his teammates around him were celebrating with unbridled joy. Ronaldo smiled, not exploded, not collapsed, smiled, as though he had known somewhere underneath everything that this moment had always been coming. History sometimes allows people to become what they were always supposed to be, just not always on the first attempt. The 2006 World Cup, Germany. Germany in 2006 felt like a country celebrating something larger than football. The tournament was called the Summer Fairy Tale by Germans who lived through it. A warm summer. Open public viewing areas where hundreds of thousands gathered to watch matches on giant screens. A national team playing with freedom and excitement after years of more utilitarian football. The country had changed, not because of the World Cup. The World Cup revealed a change that had already happened. Germany, 16 years after reunification, had become comfortable with itself in a way that had not always been visible. Young Germans wrapped themselves in their flag with uncomplicated pride. That itself felt new. The shadow of the war had not disappeared. Perhaps it never would, but it had grown smaller. Football had nothing to do with that. Football simply provided a moment when it became possible to see it. The tournament. Italy arrived as a team in crisis. The Calciopoli scandal had erupted just weeks before the tournament. Multiple Italian clubs had been found manipulating referee appointments. Juventus were relegated. AC Milan had points deducted. Several other clubs received sanctions. The Italian national players who also played for those clubs arrived in Germany carrying the weight of a national scandal. Their manager, Marcello Lippi, told them something simple: focus only on Germany. Everything else can wait. They did. The knockout stages round of 16. Germany 2-0, Sweden, Argentina 2-1, Mexico after extra time, England 1-0, Ecuador, Portugal 1-0, Netherlands, Italy 1-0, Australia, Switzerland 0-0, Ukraine won 3-0 on penalties, Brazil 3-0, Ghana, Spain 1-3 France. The France-Spain match eliminated Spain at the round of 16 stage. Ribéry, Vieira and Zidane made the difference. This was Zidane's final tournament. He had come out of retirement for it. He was 34 years old. Quarterfinals, Germany 1-1, Argentina, Germany won 4-2 on penalties, Italy 3-0, Ukraine, England 0-0, Portugal won 3-1 on penalties, Brazil 0-1 France, Thierry Henry scored, England lost on penalties again. Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard both missed. England have lost 6 of their 7 World Cup penalty shootouts. Brazil against France produced one of the tournament's finest individual performances from Zidane. He created the goal. He controlled the match. He seemed at 34 to be playing the best football of his career. Semi-final 1. Germany fouls Italy. July 4, 2006. Westfalenstadion, Dortmund. Attendance 65,000. The match finished 0-0 after 90 minutes. Extra time produced 2 goals in the final 2 minutes. Fabio Grosso in the 119th minute. Alessandro Del Piero in the 121st. Germany had not conceded a goal all tournament, then 2 in 2 minutes. Italy won 2-0. The German supporters, who had created an atmosphere throughout the tournament unlike anything in recent memory, experienced the loss of a host nation with remarkable grace. Semi-final 2, France v Portugal, July 5, 2006, Allianz Arena, Munich. Attendance 66,000. Zidane converted a penalty. France won 1-0. The final, Italy v France, July 9, 2006, Olympia Stadion, Berlin. Attendance 69,000. The final produced one of football's most complicated and most unforgettable conclusions. Zidane opened the scoring with a 7th-minute penalty. He struck the ball down the middle. It hit the underside of the crossbar, bounced down, crossed the line. He turned and walked away before the ball had even reached the net. The absolute certainty of someone who had decided. Italy equalized through Marco Materazzi. The match settled into a tense, even contest. 0-0 after 90 minutes, 0-0 throughout extra time. Then in the 110th minute, with the penalty shootout approaching, Zinedine Zidane committed the most famous act of violence in World Cup history. He turned toward Marco Materazzi, head-butted him in the chest. Materazzi fell. The referee consulted the fourth official, then showed Zidane the red card. Zidane walked past the World Cup trophy on his way from the field. He did not look at it. What had been said? For weeks, lip readers, journalists, and former players debated the question. Materazzi eventually confirmed the substance of what he had said. It referred to Zidane's sister. Zidane later said he did not regret his action, that he could not have done otherwise, that some things transcend football. Whether that is weakness or dignity or both is a question each person answers for themselves. Italy won the penalty shootout 5-3. David Trezeguet struck the crossbar. Italy were world champions for the fourth time. Fabio Cannavaro lifted the trophy. He had played one of the great defensive tournaments in World Cup history. He would later win the Ballon d'Or, the last defender ever to do so. Zidane received the Golden Ball as the tournament's best player. In his final professional match, he had scored from the penalty spot and been sent off for violent conduct. History rarely offers clean endings, football especially so. Chapter 10. 2010 and 2014. South Africa, Paul the Octopus, and Germany 7 South Africa in 2010 was not simply a football tournament, it was a statement. The World Cup had never been held on the African continent. The decision to award it to South Africa was debated throughout the bidding process. Infrastructure, security, readiness, the doubts were real. The organizers addressed them, not perfectly, not without difficulty, but sufficiently. When the tournament began on June 11, 2010, and Sifiwe Tshabalala scored the first goal, the continent celebrating around him had been waiting for this moment since football was first played there. Nelson Mandela sat in the stands at Soccer City in Johannesburg. He was 91 years old. He had spent 27 years in prison on Robben Island. Football had been played in the courtyard. He had watched. Now he watched again. The Vuvuzela. Within the first day of the tournament, something had changed in how the World Cup sounded. The Vuvuzela, a plastic horn approximately 65 centimeters long, producing a continuous B-flat tone. Blown in sufficient numbers by South African supporters, the sound became an almost physical presence. Television audiences across the world heard it as a constant drone beneath all commentary. Many found it distracting. Several broadcasters requested that FIFA ban the instrument. FIFA declined. The Vuvuzela was part of South African football culture. The World Cup had come to South Africa. South Africa would not adjust to make Europeans more comfortable. That message was delivered without a single word being spoken. The tournament. Spain arrived as the reigning European champion. Their Barcelona-influenced passing style, known as tiki-taka, had transformed club football. They had not yet demonstrated they could transfer it to a World Cup. Germany had built a young, fast, technically sophisticated team. The Netherlands had rediscovered their identity. England arrived with reasonable expectations and insufficient quality to fulfill them. The knockout stages, round of 16, Uruguay 2-1, South Korea, United States 1-2, Ghana after extra time, Germany 4-1, England, Argentina 3-1, Mexico, Netherlands 2-1, Slovakia, Brazil 3-0, Chile, Paraguay 0-0, Japan, Paraguay won 5-3 on penalties, Spain 1-0, Portugal. Germany's destruction of England 4-1 deserves specific mention. England's Frank Lampard struck a shot that crossed the German goal line by nearly a meter. The referee did not award it. England were losing 2-1 when it happened. The miss became the defining argument for goal line technology, which was introduced 4 years later. Quarterfinals: Netherlands 2-1, Brazil, Uruguay 1-1, Ghana, Uruguay won 4-2 on penalties, Argentina 0-4, Germany, Spain 1-0, Paraguay. Argentina against Germany produced one of the tournament's most extraordinary results. Germany won 4-0. Maradona, coaching Argentina, watched his team dismantled tactically and physically. It was the end of his tenure as national manager. The Uruguay-Ghana match contained one of the most calculated acts of cheating in World Cup history. With seconds remaining in extra time, Ghana's Dominic Adilla headed toward goal. Luis Suarez of Uruguay deliberately handled the ball on the line. The ball was stopped. The goal was denied. Suarez was sent off. Asamoah Gyan stepped forward to take the resulting penalty. He struck the crossbar. Uruguay won on penalties. Ghana, which would have been the first African nation to reach a World Cup semi-final, went home. Suarez celebrated. Whether he had calculated that the red card was worth the denied goal has been discussed ever since. He has said that he would do it again. Semi-finals. Semi-final 1. Uruguay v Netherlands, July 6, 2010. Cape Town Stadium A. Attendance 62,479. The Netherlands won 3-2. Arjen Robben scored twice. Uruguay's Forlan had been the tournament's finest individual performer and won the Golden Ball. He scored both Uruguayan goals. Semi-final 2. Germany v Spain, July 7, 2010. Moses Mabida Stadium, Durban. Attendance 60,960. Carlos Puyol headed a corner from the right side. The ball arrived at David Villa's feet. Villa struck. 1 goal. Spain won 1-0. Germany finished third. Paul the Octopus. Paul lived in a marine center in Oberhausen, Germany. He had been born in Weymouth, England. For each German match, 2 boxes of food were placed in his tank. Each box was labeled with a national flag. Paul selected his meal. The box he chose was assumed to indicate his prediction for the match result. He correctly predicted all 7 German matches, including most famously Germany's semi-final defeat to Spain. When his Spanish food box was chosen, German supporters were not entirely amused. He then correctly predicted Spain as the winner of the final. After the tournament, he received death threats from several countries. He died in October 2010. He was approximately 2.5 years old, which is normal for an octopus. He was given a formal obituary by the Marine Center. Football had found briefly its most improbable celebrity. The final: Netherlands vs Spain. July 11, 2010. Soccer City, Johannesburg. Attendance 84,490. The final between the Netherlands and Spain had been anticipated as a festival of attacking football. Instead, it produced something considerably harder to classify. The Netherlands committed 16 fouls in the first half alone. Nigel de Jong's kung fu kick into Xabi Alonso's chest earned only a yellow card. Several other challenges bordered on assault. Spain maintained their composure. After 116 minutes, Andre C.S. Iniesta received the pass from Cesc Fabregas. He controlled, turned, shot, goal. Spain won the World Cup for the first time in their history. Iniesta's celebration was restrained. He removed his shirt to reveal a message written on the white undershirt beneath. Dani Jarc, always with us. Jarc, a Spanish footballer and Iniesta's close friend, had died of a heart attack the previous year at the age of 26. The greatest moment of Iniesta's career was dedicated to someone who could not be there. Sport and loss have always occupied the same space. The 2014 World Cup, Brazil. Brazil had been waiting for this moment for 12 years. Since the 2003 bid, the country had known it would host the 2014 World Cup. 12 years of preparation, 12 years of construction, 12 years of anticipation. They built 12 new or renovated stadiums, invested billions in infrastructure, generated enormous national debate about whether the money had been well spent. Protests erupted across the country in the months before the tournament. Millions of Brazilians marched in the streets. Their message varied, but one theme recurred: public money for hospitals and schools, not football stadiums. The government insisted the World Cup would stimulate the economy. Many Brazilians insisted it had already stimulated inequality. The tournament arrived regardless. And Brazil, the country that had suffered the most painful defeat in World Cup history in 1950, prepared to finally exorcise what they had been carrying for 64 years. The tournament. Neymar had become Brazil's generational talent. At 22, he was the player the country needed to be different. His performances in the group stage were extraordinary. Then, in the quarter-final against Colombia, a knee to his back during a challenge fractured his third lumbar vertebra. He was carried from the field on a stretcher. He would miss the rest of the tournament. Brazil continued, they always had before. The knockout stages round of 16, Brazil won 1, Chile. Brazil won 3-2 on penalties. Colombia 2-0, Uruguay, France 2-0, Nigeria, Germany 2-1, Algeria after extra time, Argentina 1-0, Switzerland after extra time, Belgium 2-1, United States after extra time, Netherlands 2-1, Mexico after extra time, Greece 1-2, Costa Rica after extra time. Costa Rica won 5-3 on penalties. Costa Rica's presence in the knockout rounds was the group stage surprise of the tournament. They had beaten Uruguay, Italy, and England. They eliminated Greece with 11 men plus their goalkeeper. Quarter-finals France, Jilg won Germany, Brazil 2-1, Colombia, Argentina 1-0, Belgium, Netherlands 0-0, Costa Rica, Netherlands won 4-3 on penalties. Brazil beat Colombia despite missing Neymar. But David Luiz's free kick was perhaps the finest goal of the entire tournament, hit from distance, perfectly curved, perfectly timed. Against Germany in the semi-final, they would not be so fortunate. The semi-final, Brazil v Germany, a July 8, 2014. Estadio Mineirão Belo Horizonte, a attendance, 68,141. What happened in Belo Horizonte on July 8, 2014 has no precedent in World Cup history, not at that level, not with those consequences, not in that stadium. 11 minutes. That is how long it took. Between the 11th minute and the 29th minute, Germany scored 5 goals. Thomas M. a one-quarter, Miroslav Klose, Toni Kroos again, Sami Khedira, 5 goals in 18 minutes. The Brazilian crowd fell into a silence that journalists struggled to describe without reaching for 1950. Some wept openly. Players on the field appeared unable to understand what was happening. The cameras found Brazilian supporters in tears, small children who did not understand football crying because the adults around them were crying. At halftime, it was 5-0. Shawan Koaral scored twice in the second half. Oscar scored a consolation. Germany won 7-1. The scoreline appeared next to Brazil's name on the stadium scoreboard. Photographers captured it. The images became some of the most shared in the history of football. The Mineirazo, named for the Estadio Mineirato where it happened. The second great Brazilian footballing catastrophe. 64 years after the first. The same country, a different stadium, the same silence. The other semi-final. Netherlands v Argentina. July 9, 2014. Arena de São Paulo. Attendance 63,267. Argentina and the Netherlands produced a tense defensive match, 0-0 after 90 minutes, 0-0 after extra time. Argentina won the penalty shootout 4-2. Romero saved twice. Messi had not been required to take a penalty. That would change. The third place playoff. Brazil v Netherlands. July 12, 2014. Estadio Nacional, Brasília. Attendance 68,034. Robben scored twice as the Netherlands won 3-0. Brazil's tournament had become entirely divorced from the dreams that had preceded it. Third place Netherlands, fourth place Brazil. The final, Argentina v Germany. July 13, 2014. Estadio do Maracanã, Rio de Janeiro. Attendance 74,738. The final was played at the Maracanã, the same stadium where Brazil had suffered in 1950. Now Argentina would play for the title there. The match was tight, cautious, and unspectacular for most of its duration. Higuaín missed a clear chance in the first half. Marwan Coquelin struck a post, 0-0 after 90 minutes. Then, in the 113th minute, Mario Götze controlled a cross on his chest. He turned, volleyed, goal. Germany won 1-0. Germany had beaten Brazil 7-1 and Argentina 1-0 to win the World Cup. Their fourth title overall, their first as a unified nation. Joachim Löw, the German manager, had built a patient, intelligent project over 8 years. His reward was the most coveted trophy in football. Messi received the Golden Ball. He had played well, perhaps not as well as the Golden Ball implied, or perhaps exactly as well. He had created chances, scored goals, and dragged the limited team to the final. He stood on the stage at the trophy presentation, the Golden Ball in one hand, a face that expressed very little. He was 26 years old. He had time. He would return. Chapter 11, 2018 and 2022. France's generation, Messi's destiny, and the final of the century. By 2018, football had changed in ways its founders could not have imagined. Social media had given every supporter a permanent audience. Every moment of a match was captured, replayed, analyzed, and argued about within seconds. Player salaries had reached figures that exceeded the annual revenue of small economies. Transfers of 200 million euros had become possible. The World Cup, however, retained something that club football could not replicate. It still meant more, not commercially, emotionally. Every 4 years, players who earned £50 million a year became men playing for something money could not quantify, for a country, for parents, for a version of themselves they could not access any other way. That remained irreplaceable. The 2018 World Cup, Russia. The tournament was awarded to Russia in 2010, in the same vote that awarded 2022 to Qatar. Both decisions were later investigated for alleged corruption. Several FIFA officials were indicted or convicted of crimes related to bribery around World Cup hosting decisions. The institutions that governed football had for years operated with extraordinary opacity. The Russia tournament arrived regardless. Russia in the summer of 2018 was a country that had annexed Crimea 4 years earlier. That political context sat beneath the football without ever being entirely absent. Yet the host cities were extraordinary. Moscow, St. Petersburg, Sochi, and 8 other venues. The organization was excellent. The weather was unpredictable. The football was remarkable. The tournament. Germany were eliminated in the group stage. The reigning world champions eliminated by South Korea in their final group match, a South Korea that had already been eliminated. The result produced one of the most iconic photographs of the tournament. South Korean players celebrating wildly, German players sitting on the pitch looking at the grass. Mexico supporters in nearby stadiums celebrating South Korea's victory because it allowed Mexico to advance. Football contains an entire emotional universe within 90 minutes. The knockout stages: round of 16, France 4-3, Argentina, Uruguay 2-1, Portugal, Russia 1-1, Spain, Russia won 4-3 on penalties, Croatia 1-1, Denmark, Croatia won 3-2 on penalties, Brazil 2-0, Mexico, Belgium 3-2, Japan, Sweden 1-0, Switzerland, Colombia 1-1, England won 4-3 on penalties. France against Argentina produced one of the great individual performances of the tournament. Kylian Mbappé, 19 years old, he had become the second teenager after Paolo Rossi to score in a World Cup knockout match. Against Argentina, he scored twice. Both goals were scored after he had passed the Argentine defenders at a speed that made it appear he was competing in a different sport. He won a penalty. France won 4-3. Mbappé was the story of the tournament before it was half finished. Quarter-finals: Uruguay, Euro 2 France, Brazil 1-2, Belgium, Sweden, Euro 2 England, Russia 2-2, Croatia won 4-3 on penalties. England beat Sweden to reach their first World Cup semi-final since 1990. Harry Kane had scored 6 goals, including 2 in the Sweden match. He would win the Golden Boot. Dele Alli scored one of the goals against Sweden. English supporters allowed themselves to believe. Semi-final. 1. France for Belgium, July 10, 2018. St. Petersburg Stadium. Attendance 64,286. Samuel Umtiti headed from a corner in the 51st minute. France defended impeccably. Belgium pressed throughout. France won 1-0. Semi-final 2. Croatia v England, July 11, 2018. Luzhniki Stadium, Moscow. Attendance 78,011. Trippier's free kick gave England the lead in the 5th minute. For 60 minutes, England defended competently. Croatia equalized through Perio Ie. Then, in extra time, Ivan Rakitic Mando 3 for Rukier. Mario Mando 3 for Rukier scored in the 109th minute. Croatia won 2-1. England went home again. Croatia had now played 3 consecutive knockout matches that required extra time. Against Denmark in the round of 16, against Russia in the quarter-final, against England in the semi-final. They had been on the pitch for nearly 2 hours more than France. They would play the final in 4 days. The final. France v Croatia, July 15, 2018. Luzhniki Stadium, Moscow. Attendance 78,011. Rain. Heavy rain throughout the second half. French officials, including President Macron, getting soaked in the VIP area. Croatian President Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović standing in the rain, celebrating Croatia's goals without an umbrella. The contrast became symbolic. Mario Mando 3 Rukier scored an own goal from a Griezmann free kick in the 18th minute. Croatia equalized through Perio Ie. Griezmann converted a penalty after a VAR review for handball. Pogba scored from outside the box. Mbappé scored with a right foot shot. France 4, Croatia 1. Then Mando 3 Rukier scored directly from Lloris's fumble. 4-2. France 1. Kylian Mbappé became the second teenager in history to score in a World Cup final. The first was Pelé. In 60 years, no one had managed it between them. France were world champions for the second time. Their squad contained players with roots in 22 countries. Mbappé si, Pogba, Kante si, Umtiti, Matuidi, children of immigrants, or immigrants themselves. A France that had won by being plural. That conversation about what France was and who it belonged to had not ended. But on a wet July evening in Moscow, the answer on the football pitch was clear. The 2022 World Cup. Qatar. No hosting decision in World Cup history generated more debate. Qatar is a country smaller than Connecticut. Its population at the time of the award was barely 1.5 million. Average temperatures in summer exceed 40 degrees. The country had no meaningful football tradition, no large stadiums, no infrastructure for a global tournament. The tournament was moved to November and December to avoid the summer heat. For the first time in history, the World Cup was not played in summer. Construction of 8 new stadiums began. Hundreds of thousands of migrant workers arrived from South Asia and Africa. Working conditions, living conditions, deaths. The human cost of the construction became an international story. Estimates of worker deaths varied enormously. Qatar disputed the highest figures. Critics argued even the lowest were unacceptable. The stadiums were built. They were air-conditioned. They were extraordinary. The tournament. Brazil arrived as many people's favorite. Neymar was fit. The squad contained extraordinary talent at every position. Argentina arrived with Lionel Messi, 35 years old, in his 5th and final World Cup, with something to prove that had nothing to do with proving anything. The knockout stage is round. Of 16, Netherlands 3-1, United States Argentina 2-1, Australia France 3-1, Poland England 3-0, Senegal Japan 1-1, Croatia 1-3-1 on penalties, Brazil 4-1, South Korea Morocco 0-0, Spain Morocco won 3-0 on penalties, Portugal 6-1, Switzerland. Morocco's elimination of Spain was the tournament's first great shock. They had been organized, disciplined, and brilliant in equal measure. Their goalkeeper, Yassine Bounou, saved all 3 Spanish penalties. Ronaldo scored twice for Portugal against Switzerland. He had started the match on the bench. He came on and scored. His relationship with the Portuguese manager Fernando Santos had become complicated during the tournament. 3 matches later, it would end. Quarterfinals, Netherlands 2-2, Argentina. Argentina won 4-3 on penalties. Croatia 1-1, Brazil. Croatia won 4-2 on penalties. Morocco 1-0, Portugal England 1-2 France. Morocco beat Portugal 1-0 in Nesiri's towering header. An African nation in the World Cup semi-finals for the first time. The entire continent celebrated. Ronaldo did not play in the starting lineup. He came on as a substitute after the match had already been decided. He wept at the final whistle. The cameras found him. The photograph of Ronaldo crying while leaving the pitch in his second-to-last World Cup appearance became one of the most shared images of the tournament. England against France produced the most emotionally complex match of the knockout stages. Harry Kane equalized with a penalty. Then, needing to score a second to take England level, he took another penalty. Over the bar, England were eliminated. France advanced. Kane later reflected on it with dignity. Sport asks people to carry moments they cannot put down. Semi-finals. Semi-final 1, Argentina v Croatia December 13, 2022. Lusail Stadium attendance 88,966. Messi scored from the penalty spot. Then Julian Alvarez scored twice, including 1 goal where he outran and outmuscled the entire Croatian defensive line. Argentina won 3-0. Croatia had reached 2 consecutive semi-finals. They finished third after defeating Morocco in the third-place match. Semi-final 2. France vs Morocco at December 14, 2022. Al Bayt Stadium, A attendance 68,95. France won 2-0. Mbappé RC had not scored, but Dash Asio Hernandez and Randall Kolo Muani found the net. Morocco had played beyond every expectation. They left with their heads held higher than most teams who win. The final, Argentina v France. December 18, 2022, Lusail Stadium, A attendance 88,960. Many people who watched the 2022 World Cup final immediately called it the greatest match ever played. Whether they were right is something future generations will assess. What they witnessed was this. Argentina led 2-0 with 10 minutes remaining. Di Maria had been brilliant. Messi had scored. Then Mbappé scored from the penalty spot in the 80th minute. Then Mbappé scored again, 81st minute, 2-2. Extra time. Messi scored in the 108th minute, 3-2. Argentina were winning again. Then Mbappé scored again, his third goal from the penalty spot, 3-3. A hat-trick in a World Cup final, the second in history, the first since Hurst in 1966. Penalty shootout. Loris saved from Coman. Chouam Asini missed. Gonzalo Montiel converted the winning penalty for Argentina. The game ended 4-2 in the shootout. Argentina were world champions for the third time. Lionel Messi lifted the trophy. The Emir of Qatar draped a black bisht robe over his Argentina shirt. He held the trophy above his head. 35 years old, 5th World Cup, first title. The image became the most reproduced photograph in the history of football, perhaps the most reproduced sports photograph ever taken. Mbappé had scored 3 goals in the final. He finished as the tournament's top scorer with 8 goals. He lost. He was 23 years old. He had time. Messi had his trophy. After 36 years of Argentine waiting since 1986, after 5 personal attempts beginning in 2006, after every comparison to Maradona that had ever been made, he had his trophy. Football had given him the one thing money, awards, and club success could never provide. Proof that was felt rather than argued. Chapter 12, 2026. America, 48 teams and the tournament happening now. The 2026 World Cup began on June 11th in Mexico City at the Estadio Azteca, the same stadium where Maradona punched a ball with his hand in 1986, the same stadium where he scored the goal of the century 4 minutes later, the same stadium where he lifted the World Cup 40 years ago. Football's most famous venue, hosting football's most famous tournament for the third time. The scale of this edition is genuinely unprecedented. 48 teams, 3 host nations, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, 16 cities across an entire continent, 104 matches in total. For the first time in history, a World Cup is being played across an entire continent. The format has changed. 12 groups of 4. The top 2 from each group advance automatically to the new round of 32. The 8 best third-place teams join them. The group stage has now concluded. 32 teams remain. Lionel Messi, the record that ends all arguments. Argentina opened their campaign against Algeria in Kansas City. Messi was 38 years old, playing in his 6th World Cup, the defending champion. He entered this tournament with 13 career World Cup goals. In the 21st minute, he scored. In the 44th minute, he scored again. In the 67th minute, a third, a hat-trick, his first ever at a World Cup. 16 career goals, level with Miroslav Klose's men's record. Argentina won 3-0. 4 days later, against Austria in Dallas, a penalty in the 9th minute. He put it wide. Silence. Then, in the 38th minute, a pass found him on the edge of the area. First time left foot finish. Bottom corner, 17 goals. Klose's record, held for 12 years, was gone. Then deep into stoppage time, Messi pushed through the Austrian line, had his first shot blocked, slotted home the rebound. 18 goals. He had scored all 5 of Argentina's goals in 2 matches. He had surpassed not just Klose but also Brazil's Marta, who held the overall record across men's and women's tournaments with 17 goals. Messi now stood alone as the greatest scorer in World Cup history, male or female, across 6 tournaments. 20 years. He turned 39 years old the following Wednesday. Argentina captain McAllister tried to find words. There are no words, he said, for what Messi does. Messi told the broadcast, "I'm tired. I'm running low on energy. I'm just going to enjoy this moment." 38 years old, 5 goals in 2 games, the greatest scorer in World Cup history. The argument, if it ever genuinely existed, was over. Argentina finished top of Group J. They faced Cape Verde in the round of 32. Cristiano Ronaldo, 6 World Cups, 6 times on the scoresheet. Cristiano Ronaldo was 41 years old, playing in his 6th World Cup alongside Messi, the only 2 players in history ever to do so. Against Uzbekistan, 6 minutes into the match, a cross arrived from Joao Cancelo. Ronaldo swiveled at the near post and smashed it past the goalkeeper. He had scored in 6 consecutive World Cups: 2006, 2010, 2014, 2018, 2022, 2026. No male player in history had ever scored in more than 5. Pelé scored in 4. Klose scored in 4. Messi scored in 5. Ronaldo had done it in 6. From 21 to 41, spanning 2 decades, he added a second goal. Portugal won 5-0, 10 career World Cup goals. Portugal's all-time record. At 41 years and 138 days, the oldest player with a multi-goal game in World Cup history. Whatever happened next, Ronaldo had done what nobody before him had managed. He showed up 6 times on the biggest stage and scored every single time. Cape Verde, the impossible journey. No story from this tournament has been more extraordinary than that of a small island nation off the coast of West Africa. Cape Verde, population around 500,000, ranked 67th in the world, playing in their first ever World Cup. Their goalkeeper was 40 years old. His name was Yosimar Jose Evora Diaz. Everyone called him Vozinha, Little Granny, a nickname from childhood. He had spent 19 years moving between clubs most football supporters had never heard of. By 2026, he was playing for Chaves in Portugal's 2nd division with roughly 50,000 Instagram followers. Their first match was against Spain, the reigning European champions. Spain sent 27 shots at him, 7 on target. Vozinha saved all 7. He denied Pedri, he denied Ferran Torres, he denied Oyarzabal twice in quick succession. Late in the match, Dini headed a corner that appeared bound for the corner of the net. It hit the post instead. The final score was 0-0. At the final whistle, Vozinha walked toward the tunnel and broke down. His grandparents, who had raised him, had died before this. His mother could not afford the visa. She watched from Cape Verde. He cried the entire walk off the pitch. By morning, he had 11 million Instagram followers. Within 2 days, 14 million. 5 days later, against Uruguay, a 2-time world champion, Cape Verde fell behind. Then, in the 59th minute, Their defensive midfielder Kevin Pina stood 30 yards from goal and struck the ball as hard as he could. It flew directly through the Uruguayan defensive wall and into the bottom corner. It was the first goal in Cape Verde's World Cup history. Pina had scored it with a rocket from 30 yards. He became the first player ever to score for Cape Verde at a World Cup. In spectacular fashion, Uruguay equalized. Then Cape Verde equalized again. Then Uruguay took the lead. Then Cape Verde drew level once more. 2 goals each, another draw, another point. Uruguay had 27 shots in that match. Bielsa's team dominated possession. Cape Verde simply refused to lose. The third match was against Saudi Arabia in Houston. Cape Verde needed only a draw to progress to the round of 32 for the first time in their history. A point. One single point from their final group match. 3 times in the match it seemed Saudi Arabia might score. 3 times they did not. The match ended 0-0. Cape Verde had done it. 3 matches, 3 draws, 3 points. Spain held scoreless. Uruguay held to a draw. Saudi Arabia held scoreless. In the dressing room afterward, the Cape Verde players gathered around a phone. They were waiting for the Spain-Uruguay result to confirm. When Spain's 1-0 win over Uruguay was confirmed, ending Uruguay's tournament, the celebration began. 500,000 people, round of 32 at the World Cup. Their next opponents, Lionel Messi and Argentina. The story of Cape Verde at this World Cup has no clean comparison in football history. 3 draws against opponents ranked far above them, with a goalkeeper who cried at the final whistle of every single match. Fozina will face Messi in Miami on July 3rd, the 40-year-old goalkeeper from Chavez against the greatest scorer in World Cup history. Curaçao, the smallest country, the largest salve. Curaçao has a population of 158,000 people. Their opening match was against Germany. Germany won 7-1, but Livano Comenencia scored in the 21st minute, the first goal in Curaçao's World Cup history. Then came Ecuador. Goalkeeper Eloy Room, 37 years old, made 15 saves, a World Cup record. The match ended 0-0. Curaçao had earned the first point in their history. A nation of 158,000 people celebrating a goalless draw in Kansas City as though they had won the tournament, which in a sense they had. Turkey, 62 shots, 1 victory, no advancement. Turkey arrived in 2026 with a squad of genuine quality and the memory of 2002, when this same nation finished 3rd in the World Cup and Hakan Şükür scored after just 10 seconds. The first 2 matches were painful. Against Australia, they lost 2-0. Against Paraguay, reduced to 10 men in the second half, Turkey still could not score. 2 matches, 0 goals, 0 points, 62 shots, the most shots without scoring in World Cup history since 1966. They were already eliminated heading into the 3rd match against the United States. Nothing left to play for except pride. Then, in the 98th minute of the match, Kaan Ayhan redirected a cross over the line. Turkey won 3-2. Arda Güler, 21 years old, Real Madrid, a goal and 2 assists, was named man of the match. The 2002 team had Hakan Şükür, who scored after 10 seconds and went home with a bronze medal. The 2026 team had 62 shots in 2 matches, a last-minute winner against a rotated American squad, and a flight home with nothing else to show for it. Football is the cruelest of the beautiful games, and also sometimes, briefly, the most redemptive. The stories that shape the group stage. The 2026 tournament has produced surprises at a rate that even the expanded format cannot entirely explain. Brazil, five-time world champions, could only draw 1-0 with Morocco in their opening match. In one of the most anticipated matches of the opening round, played at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, the African champions held the tournament favorites for 90 minutes. Brazil eventually won the group, but it was not the commanding start anyone expected. Norway arrived without much expectation. They left the group stage as one of its most compelling stories. Erling Haaland scored 4 goals in 3 matches, including 2 in the opening win over Iraq. Then, in the decisive third match against France, something remarkable happened. Norway rested Haaland and Odegaard. It did not matter. Ousmane Dembélé scored a hat-trick in the first half, the second fastest in World Cup history. France won 4-1. Norway lost but finished second in the group and advanced. The victory was a statement from France. Their firepower, even facing weakened opposition, was extraordinary. Senegal beat Iraq 5-0 in the same group on the same night. They too advanced to the knockout rounds. Switzerland, who dominated Qatar for 77 minutes in the opening match only for a last-minute equalizer to rob them of the win, recovered to win the group. The Qatar draw remains one of the tournament's more surprising results. South Africa, in their first World Cup since 2010, made it to the knockout stages for the first time in their history. Tapelo Maseko's 63rd minute goal against South Korea on the final day of Group A sent Bafana Bafana through. The host nation of 2010 has returned, and they have made it count. Belgium played Iran to 2 consecutive draws. Egypt proved more difficult than expected. The Group G finale, Egypt versus Iran, ended 1-1 after Iran had a stoppage time winner ruled out by VAR. The overturned goal left Iranian players collapsed and crying on the pitch at Seattle Stadium. The margin between heartbreak and survival at a World Cup has rarely been made more visible. Canada crushed Qatar 6-0 in their second match, then lost 3-1 to Switzerland on the final day. They advance. Ecuador arrived at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey knowing they needed to win. Having lost to Ivory Coast in the first match and drawn 0-0 with Curaçao in the second, their tournament had been a source of frustration. No wins, 1 point. 0 goals in 2 matches. Germany scored in the second minute. Leroy Sané, 1-0. Ecuador were undone before they had drawn breath. Then Nilson Angulo equalized in the 9th minute, 1 each. Then, in the 77th minute, Gonzalo Plata poked the ball past Neuer. 2-1. Ecuador held on through 13 minutes of additional time. When the final whistle blew, they had beaten Germany 2-1. The team that had scored 0 goals in their first 2 matches had just beaten the group winners. Ecuador advanced as one of the best third-placed teams. Colombia have been the quiet revelation of Group K. 3 matches, 3 results that suggest a team in form at exactly the right time. The state of the tournament. The group stage is over. 32 teams remain. Round of 32 matchups include Brazil against Japan, the Netherlands against Morocco, France against a third-placed team, Argentina against Cape Verde, Spain against the runner-up of Group J, Germany against a third-placed team, and the United States against Bosnia and Herzegovina. The round of 32 begins June 28th. The quarterfinals are scheduled for July 4th and 5th. The final is July 19th at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, 96 years after 13 teams boarded ships in European harbors, 96 years after Lucien Laurent scored a goal nobody understood was the first. The knockout rounds begin. Messi faces Vozinha in Miami. Mbappe and Dembélé are on form for France. Haaland has 4 goals and the tournament is barely half over. Brazil have Vinicius Jr. and Neymar back after years of injury. Germany look dangerous. Morocco beat Spain in 2022 and drew with Brazil in this tournament. The group stage has told us what this World Cup is. Unpredictable, expansive, full of nations that were not supposed to be here and are refusing to live quietly. What it becomes from here is still being written. It always is. We have traveled a long way tonight, from Montevideo in the winter of 1930 to New York in the summer of 2026, from 13 teams on passenger ships to 48 teams in 3 countries, from a trophy that one man carried beneath his arm to the most recognized object in world sport. From Lucien Laurent, a factory worker who scored the first goal in history and went home thinking nothing special had happened, to Lionel Messi, holding a trophy above his head while billions watched simultaneously. The World Cup is not the most important thing in the world. It never was. It is a football tournament. It begins, it ends, the world continues. But within those weeks, something unusual happens. Not everywhere, not in every living room, not for every person on earth, but for an extraordinary number of human beings simultaneously. The same thing matters, the same result, the same goal, the same player, running and falling and standing again. That shared attention is rarer than it appears. History has produced very few things that billions of people experience together in real time. The World Cup is one of them. It began with almost nothing, a ship, an ocean, a trophy small enough to carry under one arm, a tournament that might not survive. It has survived. 96 years, 23 tournaments, 8 different champions, and somewhere tonight, in one of the stadiums across North America, another match is being played, another goal is being scored, another player is running toward the corner flag, arms spread, screaming something that needs no translation. And history is quietly continuing. It always does. Sleep well. The story is still being written. Until next week.